Hanafi madhab is based upon the idea that fiqh is beyond just knowing the Quran and Sunnah. It's going deeper.
It's a misunderstanding to assume that the Hanafi madhab is Imam Abu Hanifa. These were other scholars
Not at all, yeah.
that became pillars of the madhab.
The Hanafis are looking at amal. They're looking at the matan. Because fuqaha look at amal, muhaddithun generally look a bit more at thubut.
We both have the same conclusion that Imam Abu Hanifa kana imaman min a'immatil Islam. He was an imam from the imams of Islam.
Imam Muhammad, the student of Abu Hanifa, the student of the Imam Ahli al-Ra'i, he studies under Imam Malik.
And I think one of the best things a teacher can do for his student is give his student a level of independence.
Al-Nawawi says in Al-Fawaid al-Bahiyya, in one of his books, he says, all of these are streams that connect with the fountain of Nubuwwah.
You know, Al-Shafi'i, he said, الناس في الفقه يعلون على أبي حنيفة, right? In fiqh, people, they rely upon, they lean on Abu Hanifa.
If you went to Imam Malik's gathering, you would probably not be allowed to talk.
You know, there's a joke, Sheikh Rashid, a good friend of mine, who came for the Hanbali madhab. He mentioned that As-Subki, if he could throw in birds into Tabaqat al-Shafi'iyya, he would do that. So Sheikh will put you in there as well, inshallah.
al-Majlis مع Musa Adnan.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu, brothers and sisters. Welcome back to another episode of the Al-Majlis podcast. Today in the Majlis, we have a very, very special guest joining us, Sheikh Muadh, Chati, mashallah, tabarakallah. Welcome to the podcast, Sheikh.
Jazakumullah khair, ahsan jaza for having me. Alhamdulillah, very happy to be on.
Allah yabarik fikum. Brothers and sisters, when I begin this podcast, I actually want to mention a short story. Actually, I came across one of Sheikh Muadh's books, an introduction to the science of hadith. And, I looked for that book. I found it on one of the websites, Ismail Books. I purchased that book. And subhanAllah, I didn't think to myself at the time, this is how the qadr of Allah works, subhanAllah. I believe we probably had al-Majlis at that time. I never would have thought that we'd have the opportunity to have you on discussing an introduction to the Hanafi madhab. So it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the episode, Sheikh, and the people can check out the book as well. It's a very beneficial book. Sheikh Muadh is possibly, I believe, one of the best people to actually do this podcast with for the Hanafi madhab. Not only because of his qualifications, which I'm about to get into, but also because he's actually authored and in the process of publishing his next book, inshallah, which is an introduction to the Hanafi madhab.
Inshallah.
So we have someone with us who's actually has authored a book on the subject. I've had access, alhamdulillah, to the Musawwada, if we can call it that, the draft version. But alhamdulillah, it's a pleasure to have you, Sheikh. So for all of you who are listening to us, Sheikh Mufti Muadh is the founder of Islamic Knowledge, right? Which is a website online. You do different courses, islamicknowledge.co.uk. He also has his YouTube channel. We're going to link it below so you can check out more stuff from the Sheikh as well. He was born in Blackburn and he completed his Islamic educational studies in the local madrasa, if we can call it that. In 2006, he went on to complete his Alamiya studies at Jami'atul Ilm al-Huda, which is based in Blackburn, UK, one of the madaris over there, right? Under scholars such as Mufti Abdul Samad, Ahmed Sahib, Sheikh Mufti Shabir Ahmed. Is this the Mufti Shabir that's known for hadith, right?
Yes.
MashaAllah, tabarakallah. And after this, in 2015, Sheikh Muadh, he traveled to South Africa, Durban, to study Takhassus fil Fiqh under Mufti Ibrahim Desai, under the tutelage of him as well, rahimahullah. Upon completing his iftar studies in 2017, he moved to Benoni in South Africa to study a Takhassus fil Hadith course with Mufti Muhammad Ishaq also, and then he returned in 2018. And currently you are teaching, Sheikh, right?
Yes.
And where exactly are you teaching? In Blackburn?
I do teach in Darul Blackburn as well, and
MashaAllah.
I do teach online on my platform, alhamdulillah.
Jameel, mashallah, tabarakallah. Once again, absolute pleasure to host you, Sheikh. We have many, I mentioned in the episode with Sheikh Jihad on the Maliki episode that the Hanafi madhab, it's dhuhur in the UK, in the West specifically. I believe the Hanafi elders done an excellent job in establishing madaris all over the country. I mean, if you want to become a Hanafi scholar, if you want to become a Hanafi talib ilm in the West, it's probably the easiest madhab to study in a proper manner, in a systemized manner, You could go through all of Hanafi fiqh, you could go through Takhassus fil Hadith, what you guys called Dawra al-Hadith, right? And come out as Hanafi talib ilm and, you know, do work in the community, mashallah, tabarakallah. So, Sheikh, what's your kind of opinion of some of the madaris in the UK?
So 100%. I mean, do we attribute that to the madhab, or do we attribute that to like these traditions that have kind of come from the subcontinent and South Asia? I think that's more to do with the South Asian community and the ulama there that moved to these countries and made a lot of efforts from the different traditions that we have. So alhamdulillah, I think that is more to do with the South Asian ulama and their kind of the whole tradition that we had there. In terms of the madhab itself, like how did it spread? We'll come to that inshallah ta'ala.
Yes.
There is quite a bit of the madhab just being very practical in terms of, you'll notice the Ottoman Empire, for example, the Mughals, the Seljuks. We'll come to them inshallah ta'ala.
Yes.
Most of, and this is something Sheikh Ali al-Tantawi I think mentions as well in his Rijalun min al-Tarikh. And the quote's in the book, it'll take me a while to find it. But he actually says that majority of the empires in the past, they did adopt the Hanafi madhab, or the major empires at least would prefer to adopt the Hanafi madhab in that sense. So it was more to do with the idea that the Hanafi madhab was just very, very, should we call it luck? I don't know what we'd call it. I say, the academic way of looking at it would be like they just, you know, the empires chose them and it was just, they had the most qudat or whatever. Another way of looking at it is Allah Ta'ala saw ikhlas in these ulama. So, you know, and that's the kind of approach I take, that there was some level of qubuliyah as well.
Yeah.
And we can't simply talk like academic in the sense that it was this factor, this factor. There's also a little bit of, not a little bit, quite a bit of divinity in there as well. Alhamdulillah, Allah Ta'ala made it such that these empires, Ottoman Empire, Seljuks, all of them, they preferred to be Hanafis. In fact, Mahmud Ghaznavi, like all of, the other day, I know we're digressing, but seeing as, inshallah, the other day I came across a book, Manaqibu Abi Hanifa, it's by a scholar by the name of Ad-Dinawari. So this is not Ibn Qutayba at all or any of them, much later scholar. I think he passed away around about, so in the time of the Ghaznavis, after Mahmud Ghaznavi. He has to write this book because he's a student of Abu Nu'aym al-Asfahani, the author of Hilyatul Awliya. In Hilyatul Awliya, he was doing a majlis of Hilyatul Awliya in the Ghaznavid Empire. And I think this was in Ghazna. Literally, he wrote this book in Ghazna. The reason he wrote it is because in the gathering, they were going through Hilyatul Awliya, and a story came across about Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, and disparaging story. He actually, they imprisoned the sheikh because of this disparaging story. Now, I don't agree with that, right? Yeah. But they imprisoned the sheikh, and then the sheikh, we don't know what happened after that, but this sheikh then ends up writing a book on the Manaqib of Abu Hanifa. Okay. So you can imagine he must have wrote this book either in prison to kind of get himself out, or Allah knows best, but to kind of let the Sultan know that I'm not one. This story just came up in the gathering. The Sufi that had actually told him to go through Hilyatul Awliya, because obviously it's a book full of stories like that as well, he actually got whipped. So you can see the empires were very much like even Hanafi, etc. Seljuks, we know the whole mihna that the Shafi'is went through was primarily because the Seljuks were Hanafis. So we apologize for that.
Well, why are you laughing at me, Sheikh? Allah yabarak fikum. No, mashallah, tabarakallah, Sheikh. You began by discussing Imam Abu Hanifa, and that is actually our first area of discussion. That needs to be our first area of discussion. And Nu'man bin Thabit, rahimahullah ta'ala. And Imam Abu Hanifa, one of the, I wasn't imprisoned, but I was taken to account by some people online, actually. I had done a short video about Imam Abu Hanifa, and I basically mentioned that Imam Abu Hanifa was At-Taymi, Al-Iraqi, etc. And I went on mentioning different things, and I was giving him all of these different, kind of nicknames, if you want to call them that. And I mentioned that Imam Abu Hanifa is mentioned about him that he was originally Persian.
Yes.
And one of my main sources for that small video was Siyaru Alam al-Nubala of Imam al-Dhahabi. Yes. So some of the Afghani brothers, they went for me. They were like, actually, he was from Kabul. Okay. Actually, he was from Kabul. Right? And there were so many comments. I was like, hey, I was just doing naql of Imam al-Dhahabi. So maybe you could tell us about Imam Abu Hanifa. Where was he from? What is his background? Yeah. And, some things about him.
I mean, Wallahu alam, what they meant by he was definitely Persian. I think there's no, Wallahu alam, denying that. Some of the scholars say tawatara. This is mutawatir about Abu Hanifa, that he was a Persian. And the Persian ulama, mashallah, in that whole area, there was a very strong Persian culture in that time, especially. The Persian culture, obviously, as a student of history yourself will know, it continued right until the Mughal times, really. That Persian, they used to speak in Persian, etc.
Yeah.
So, but before we come to Abu Hanifa, I think it's really important to appreciate Kufa. And I think you can't have a conversation about Abu Hanifa without discussing Kufa. And so there's a hadith in Sahih Bukhari, and obviously I'm just reading from the Hanafi book as well. So inshallah the book should be out around about October, if I can just market the book as well a little bit, inshallah.
Of course. This is your madkhal, your introduction.
100%, inshallah. So
It's
I've
in
been
English.
working on this book for 10 years, and I think it's very important for me to not act like as though I'm the most knowledgeable about the Hanafi madhab. That's not true at all. And even this picture that I'm painting of the madhab, I remember I said this in a gathering in USA when I went for the hadith book. I mentioned, I was doing a book tour on the hadith book, and one gathering we spoke about the Hanafi madhab only. I started the gathering in Chicago on this by saying, and the recording is on YouTube, I started by saying, the picture I am going to give you of the Hanafi madhab is one picture. That does not mean it is the only picture. And I appreciate there may be another way of looking at the madhab. This is the picture I think is the most accurate, inshallah ta'ala. But this book that I've been working on is for like about 10 years, alhamdulillah, and I think inshallah it accurately portrays Abu Hanifa. So Alqamah ibn Qais is, so firstly let's understand the sanad of what happened when they conquered Kufa around about 16 Hijri. So we know that the conquest into Iraq began in the time of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, and then also in the period of Umar radiallahu anhu. They conquer, I think they start off with Hira, then they get to like what we might call Madain, Ctesiphon, all of these areas, and then they conquer the areas a bit closer to Baghdad, which I think was, to be honest with you, Ctesiphon is quite close to Baghdad. In about 16 or 17 Hijri, Umar radiallahu anhu sends two Sahaba radiallahu anhum. So he makes a town called Kufa. So Kufa is made by Umar radiallahu anhu as a garrison town. And you'll know as a student of history as well, that garrison towns were like, this was where they were going to, this is going to be where most of those Sahaba who took part in the conquest of Iraq, Umar radiallahu anhu was worried that if they start integrating within the Persian culture, they could lose the identity of Islam. Also, we need a kind of base where in all of our main warriors stay here, and we create like almost like a replica of Medina Munawwara in Kufa. And so Kufa was actually meant to be like a model of Medina Munawwara.
Interesting.
And so he sends Abdullah ibn Mas'ud and Ammar ibn Yasir radiallahu anhuma, he sends them to Kufa. And this is narrated in Tabaqat of Ibn Sa'ad, etc. All of them, they say, Umar radiallahu anhu said, and this is, you can find this in, Imam Ahmad narrates in Fada'il al-Sahaba, إني قد بعثت إليكم عمار بن ياسر أميرا وعبد الله بن مسعود معلما ووزيرا وإنهما من النجباء من أصحاب رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم من أصحاب بدر وقد جعلت عبد الله بن مسعود على بيت مالك فتعلموا منهما واقتدوا بهما وقد آثرتكم بعبد الله بن مسعود على نفسي. Umar radiallahu anhu and Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu in general used to prefer mashwara with the Sahaba. They used to prefer to keep them in Medina Munawwara so that they can consult. That's why I guess the usuliyin will be able to answer this better, but the ijma' that took place in the time of Umar radiallahu anhu and Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, any concepts which were discussed within the Sahaba, and we know this ijma' is from the time of Umar radiallahu anhu, is very strong. And that would be generally considered to be like something which, if Umar radiallahu anhu held this position, then that means it's mujma' ali and Abu Bakr, because they used to prefer to keep the Sahaba within Medina Munawwara. When he sends Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, he says, وَقَدْ آثَرْتُكُمْ بِعَبْدِ اللَّهِ ibn Mas'ud عَلَى نَفْسِي. I've given preference to you people in regards to Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. I would have preferred to have kept him in Medina Munawwara. So he was, وَإِنَّهُمَا مِنَ النُّجَبَاءِ مِنْ أَصْحَابِ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ. And when his student, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, he's got a student called Alqamah ibn Qais. When Alqamah ibn Qais comes to Basra in one of his journeys, he says, not Basra, Sham. He says, this is in Bukhari, it's hadith number 13742. So he says, قدمت الشام. This is all narrated by Imam al-Bukhari. He says, فصليت ركعتين. He says, I read 2 rakats, and then he says, اللهم يسر لي جليسا صالحا. He makes this dua, Allah give me a good company. This is the student of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud is the one who Umar radiallahu anhu sent to teach the people of Kufa, because he's created like this type of base in Kufa. As they're conquering Iraq, they're now going to use this as a launch pad. So Abdullah ibn Mas'ud is the muallim. His student is Alqamah ibn Qais. Alqamah ibn Qais goes to Syria. When he goes to Syria, he meets Abu Darda. When Abu Darda sees him, and he asks him, why have you come here? He says, I wanted to learn a bit of... So he asks him a few things. He says, أَوَلَيْسَ عِنْدَكُمْ إِبْنُ أُمِّ عَبْدٍ صاحب النعلين والوسادة والمطهرة أفيكم الذي أجاره الله من الشيطان يعني على لسان نبيه صلى الله عليه وسلم. He's referring to Abdullah ibn Mas'ud.
Yeah.
Is there not that individual amongst you who used to hold the sandals of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam? He used to be so close to Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam that he used to hold the miswak of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he knew everything about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So Madhab Abi Hanifa, Madhab Abdullah ibn Mas'ud to a large degree, very, very much. It's very much built upon the opinions and practices of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud and the students of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud and the scholars of Kufa in general.
And this is Imam Abu Hanifa's kind of sanad in a sense. He
This
took
is
from
his-
Hamad, who took from Ibrahim.
I like to call it the scholarly lineage. So that's how I've referred to it, because this is his, like, these are his forefathers, so to speak. So sometimes people, well, Abu Hanifa, where did he come from? This is his sanad. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud is the teacher. His student is Al-Qamat ibn Qais. Al-Qamat ibn Qais has a student called Ibrahim al-Nakha'i. Ibrahim al-Nakha'i needs no introduction. Lisanu fuqaha al-Kufa. He was like, and we'll come to him, because when it comes to methodology, Abu Hanifa is very close to Ibrahim al-Nakha'i's methodology. He's kind of building upon what Ibrahim al-Nakha'i started in Kufa. And then you have Hamad ibn Abi Sulaiman, and his student is Abu Hanifa. So I would say to everyone who's just probably watching this podcast, remember that sanad. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, student Al-Qamat ibn Qais. Read their biographies in Sir wa Alam al-Nubala. That's one thing I would say to every Hanafi or anyone wanting to know about Abu Hanifa or the Hanafi Madhab. Begin by reading the biographies of each of these individuals from Sir. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, student Al-Qamat ibn Qais, student Ibrahim al-Nakha'i, student Hamad ibn Abi Sulaiman, and his student Abu Hanifa and Nu'man ibn Thabit. So when Ibn Hajar speaks about this, when he says this, when he mentions this hadith that came in Sahih Bukhari, he says, "Al-muradu al-thana'u alayhi bi khidmati an-nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam wa annahu li shiddati ملازمته له لأجل هذه الأمور ينبغي أن يكون عنده من العلم ما يستغني طالبه به عن غيره." That it will make a talibul ilm should not need to come out of Kufa at all and go anywhere else, because Abdullah ibn Mas'ud and his students are there. Al-Qamat ibn Qais being one of them. Just to show you Kufa and how it was. Imam Ahmad himself says, and this is again in Khatib al-Baghdadi's, has narrated this as well in his Tarikh al-Baghdad, and I'm sure, I think it's even in Al-Ilal, where Imam Ahmad says, Ashabu Abdullah, the students of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud used to, كانوا يرحلون من الكوفة إلى المدينة فيتعلمون من عمر ويسمعون منه. They used to go and learn from Umar radiallahu anhu, the students of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. They used to go to Medina Munawwara and learn from Umar. Umar's approach and Abdullah ibn Mas'ud's approach was very similar. They were very, what we refer to as, and we're going to come to the term, rather just say now, Ahlul Ra'i.
Yeah.
Some might not like me saying that Umar radiallahu anhu was Ahlul Ra'i, but it's true. You shouldn't say it like that. On its own, he wasn't Ahlul Ra'i. We wouldn't say it like that fully. But he was definitely a founding father of this approach. Umar radiallahu anhu, we've got numerous stories of him looking beyond just the explicit statements of Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam. He goes beyond, he looks at the ma'na behind it. He's a very ta'lili approach towards everything. And this is going to take me on to another topic, which I won't go there, which is what is fiqh itself. The Hanafi madhab is based upon the idea that fiqh is beyond just the knowing the Quran and Sunnah. It's going deeper, understanding ilal, ahkam, masalih, qawaid. And really, I'm going to say it because it is what it is, maqasid. Ibn Ashur, in his Maqasid al-Shari'at al-Islamiyah, one of the pages, he says, you will find more maqasid in the early fiqh books than you will sometimes find in the books of Ash-Shatibi or some of the later scholars who wrote on maqasid, like even al-Ghazali, etc. He says this. So the Maliki madhab, obviously we've already got, the Shaykh has already spoke about the Maliki madhab, but the Hanafi madhab and the Maliki madhab were strongly based upon the idea of ma'ani, looking beyond just the Quran and Sunnah and the explicit words of the Quran and Sunnah. So Abdullah ibn Mas'ud is very much like that. We've got Umar radiallahu anhu, at least in 3 scenarios, he says, wafaqtu rabbi fi thalath. 3 scenarios wherein he supposedly contradicts what Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam wants to do or is about to do. For example, the salah ala al-munafiqeen. So Abdullah ibn Ubay ibn Salul, for example, Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam actually, I think he does read the salah upon him, and then Umar radiallahu anhu says, I'm not going to be doing this, and then istaghfir lahum aw la tastaghfir lahum wa la tusalli ala ahadi minhum. So you can see then إنما الصدقات للفقراء والمساكين the مؤلفة القلوب issue, for example, Umar radiallahu anhu. So you can see Umar radiallahu anhu's approach is very, very different to just looking at the zahir of what Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam is saying. And so this approach is very strong in Kufa in general, in the students of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, Al-Qama, in Ibrahim al-Nakha'i even more. And I want to just give you 2 examples.
Yeah.
One example, Sa'id ibn al-Musayyab in Madinatul Munawwara, he is, you could say, the slight not opposite, but slightly different from Ibrahim al-Nakha'i. In al-Muwatta, I think it's in Kitab al-Fara'id, if I'm not mistaken, you have the very famous story of where Rabi'at ibn Abd al-Rahman, Rabi'at al-Ra'i as they call him, very famous story. He says, Kam fi isba'il mar'a. One finger, if a woman's finger is broken, he says, Ashrun min al-ibil. He says, Kam fi isba'ain. He says, Ashrun. Kam fi thalath. He says, Thalathun or something like that. Or he says, yeah. And then he says, Kam fi arba'. He says, Ashrun. So he says, إِذَا عَظُمَتْ مُصِيبَتُهَا نَقَصَتْ عِقْلُهَا. So then he says, when her calamity became greater, when more fingers are broken, you went down in the number of camels that she gets. So the thing he says to him is, أَعِرَاقِيٌّ أَنْتَ? Are you an Iraqi that you're looking for this systematic? إِنَّهَا السُنَّةِ يَا ابْنَ أَخِي. Indeed, it's the sunnah. And I found this same quote. So with Sheikh Shabir, mashallah, we are going through Sahih ibn Hibban at the moment. In Sahih ibn Hibban, I found a very similar quote wherein, if I'm not mistaken, al-Awza'i, Imam al-Awza'i, rahimahullah ta'ala, who I think passed away about 157 or something, he is asking Ibn Shihab al-Zuhri, who passed away 124. He asked him a question, and Ibn Shihab al-Zuhri tells him, the sunnah has come like this, don't ask these questions here. So I've got the quote in the book, I've quoted it as well. So you can see what I'm trying to say to you is, to be able to understand Abu Hanifa first, you need to understand what's going on in Kufa. And so let me just say it to you like this. If you were to say that, and I'm going to quote here Ahmad Sanubar, who is the author of, there's a book called Min al-Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam ila al-Bukhari. He quotes a statement which he mentions a quote which is very, very important. That he says that if you were to say that 2/3 of the ruwat of hadith in the Kutub al-Sittah come from Medina, Makkah and Kufa, then that would be totally accurate. Like the asanid come from these 3 places. So he then says, okay, take 4 out of the 10 qurra from Kufa. Take Lugha, Kufa. Everything's happening in Kufa, Iraq, Basra. Whether you want to say Kufa or Basra, but these two are both the same, essentially it's Iraq. So Iraq, really, within the minds of students, this idea needs to kind of develop, which is, it's not just Medina Munawwara. Medina Munawwara is, of course, subhanAllah, but it's Kufa as well. In fact, within, and we shouldn't mention Orientalists too much, but guys like Shaht, etc., considered Kufa to be ahead of Medina Munawwara. Na'udhu billah. We don't say that, we don't go that far as well, but they were very ahead in terms of their, like, you know, hadith as well. There's a whole kind of discussion I have in the book. Did the Ahlul Kufa and Ahlul Ra'i have less ahadith? Yeah. That's not true as well. They had plenty of ahadith.
I read that section last night. I think I read some of that section last night. Yeah.
In Jami' Bayan Akhdh al-Ilm or Jami' Bayan al-Ilm, however you want to say it, Ibn Shihab al-Zuhri is shocked that there is someone in Kufa who knows all of the ahadith that he knows. He's like, how are you guys aware of it? So there is a higher chance of the people of Ahlul Kufa knowing the ahadith of Medina Munawwara and Makkah than there is of the people of Medina and Makkah knowing the ahadith of Kufa, simply because of Hajj and Umrah and Ziyarah. So Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, for example, travels to Makkah and Medina
50 or so times.
100%. Whereas Imam Malik is mashhur, he never moved out of Medina Munawwara.
He didn't leave Medina for
He never left Medina Munawwara. So this idea also needs to kind of change as well. Then when we come to Imam Abu Hanifa himself, so if you were to discuss him, he starts his life off as a businessman. So this is like a kind of encouragement for everyone.
Before we go to Imam Abu Hanifa, Sheikh, I want to ask you a question, because for some people, they may be thinking, okay, you're speaking about Kufa in this way, where essentially, I mean, the way to describe it is you've praised Kufa quite a lot, but isn't Kufa the same place where we had people, for example, fabricating ahadith?
Yes.
You had all sorts of things going on here. It was... So what about that?
100%. So we have the very famous statement from many muhaddithun, to be honest with you, that treat the hadith of Kufa like you treat Ahlul Kitab, right?
Yeah.
لا نصدقهم ولا نكذبهم. There's a very famous story, I've mentioned it in here as well, subhanAllah. Where in Imam Malik, Imam Malik, I think, says that. It might be Zuhri as well, wallahu alam. But Imam Malik says that too. He says that adraktu mashayikhana. I found my mashayikh. And the funniest part of this story, the funniest part of this story is Imam Muhammad is in the gathering. So
exactly, it was
Imam
Imam
Muhammad's in the gathering.
It was
so
Imam
he
Malik,
sees Imam Muhammad, and he then actually he looks at Imam Muhammad, and I want to see if I can quote the statement. He sees Imam Muhammad, and he actually looks at him, and he says, he gets a bit, Imam Muhammad's narrating the story, and he realizes, oh, there's a scholar of Kufa here. And Imam Muhammad's acquiring a hadith from al-Muwatta, and he's like, what's Imam Malik doing, you know? So he says, I'm sorry, look, this is what I found with my mashayikh saying, that treat the ahadith like how you treat the Ahlul Kitab. So this is something that has been explained quite extensively by a scholar by the name of Sheikh Dhafar Ishaq Ansari and many others as well. That Kufa was like, so for students of history, they'll understand this. And I'm just going to quote a little bit here, which is that if you look into the Umayyad times, the Iraqians, I'm going to quote him if that's okay. And he's got a book called The Early Development of Islamic Jurisprudence in Kufa. And it's a very good book. I really think this book needs to be read by most students. He says the Iraqians were familiar with religious doctrines and philosophical ideas with which the Arabs of the peninsula were either inconvenient or of which they were only vaguely aware. Moreover, there were a large number of local non-Arab converts which constituted a much greater proportion of the Iraqi Muslim society than did the non-Arab converts in Hijaz. Why is this important? Because during the Umayyad period, we know that the non-Arab Muslims had on the whole only a nominal share in political power. So when you've got this idea that we don't really have as much political power, then you express your ideas and you express your talent in other ways. And so therefore you get a melting pot of every idea in Kufa.
Yeah.
You get all the Zanadiqa exist in Kufa.
Yeah.
Or you get everything. You get, I mean, not just Kufa, sorry, Iraq. I mean, the Mu'tazila, Qadariya, the fetus stage would be Qadariya, so to speak, of the Mu'tazila. They start in Basra. So Khawarij, all of that you're going to start getting, you're seeing that in Iraq because it's just a melting pot of ideas. Also, could we also say from like, if we were to look at historical perspective, this was the land of the Persians. So there's a little bit of all of those Persian ideas also as well. So essentially Iraq became a melting pot of all of these different ideas. Sheikh Dhafar Ishaq Ansari, for example, he continues, he says, it is significant that they played the pioneering role even in the foundation and development of the sciences related to Arabic language, not to mention the purely Islamic sciences such as tafsir, seerah. If you even look into seerah, for example, as well. It is from Iraq that most of the theological schools sprang up and most of the currents of theological thought originated. So it was because of this idea that they've not got as much political power. They've got a nominal share in political power, and therefore they have to express their talents in other ways. And yeah, I think the fact that you get all of these deviants appearing in Kufa, in Iraq, let me just say, it only supports the idea of Iraq being a place where literally it was bustling. It was the cosmopolitan place to be because go to, should we get ourselves in trouble by saying it was the Birmingham of in those times where you get everything.
We can say that.
We can say that, right?
Yeah.
So whereas if you come to a place where there's only one kind of power in charge, or there's only one way of thinking, which is maybe, I'm not saying Medina Munawwara was like that, but it's like Medina Munawwara a bit more concentrated with Ahlul Hadith scholars who perhaps wouldn't prefer the idea of Ra'i and asking Ara'ayta. And this, if you went into gatherings of Kufa, in Basra as well, perhaps even in Baghdad later on, which Baghdad is made in 145 of Ismail Mansur, you would probably just hear Ara'ayta in every. There's a funny quote, a Sha'bi who was actually in Baghdad, in Kufa obviously, and he was let's just say he had a friendly / not friendly relationship with Ibrahim al-Nakha'i.
Yeah.
They were frenemies, if you want to say it like that. But it's lovely seeing read a Sha'bi's biography and see it. It's so funny as well. So he says, لو كان هؤلاء, he says about the Ahlul Ra'i in his time. He says if they were here in the time of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, half of the Quran would just be yas'alunak. So there was a lot of questions. Abu Hanifa's whole idea and the place he was in was all to do with basically asking questions. And
this is what Asad ibn al-Furat, he tried to do with Imam Malik, right? Yes. And Imam Malik was like, if you want this...
إن كان كذا كان كذا إذا كان كذا كان إن أردت هذا فعليك بالعراق. And he I think we discussed this in the call. Like,
we did,
either we say he called Imam Malik's bluff, or Imam Malik was not bluffing. He really was saying, إن أردت هذا فعليك بالعراق. Go to Iraq. You'll find this. And interestingly, when Imam Muhammad goes and travels to Imam Malik, he is impressed with Imam Malik, rahimahullah ta'ala. When he comes back to Kufa, he still doesn't abandon his learnings from Abu Hanifa. So he goes to, and we'll come to him inshallah ta'ala, he goes to Imam Malik straight after Imam Abu Hanifa more or less passes away. He spends 3 years with Imam Malik, and this would be, Imam Abu Hanifa passed away 150. So probably around that period is when he went to study under Imam Malik for 3 years. When he comes back, he still sticks to his Ahlul Ra'i tendencies, and he's still very much...
I have questions on that, but we'll speak about it when we discuss Imam Muhammad bin Hassan, inshallah ta'ala. So now we were moving on to Imam Abu Hanifa. So this is the context. Kufa where Imam Abu Hanifa was based, etc.
Yep.
So Imam Abu Hanifa himself, born 80 Hijri.
So born 80 Hijri, and definitely this seems to be the correct opinion. Some scholars do try to hold another opinion as well, but this doesn't seem to be accurate. Abu Hanifa, because some people think he has a daughter named Hanifa or something like that. There is this opinion, but it doesn't seem to be accurate. Allahu alam. What's mentioned in his biography is that Hanifa or Hanif was like a name they would give in Iraq, like a dialect to pots, ink pots. And because he had a massive gathering of students that would come and acquire everything, fiqh, discussions on different topics that he would have, even probably ahadith as well. That's a separate issue. How many ahadith did Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah narrate? That's a separate topic. But Hanif was the name of like these ink pots. So he became Abu Hanifa, father of the ink pots. Wallahu alam. Again, these are the stories that are mentioned in his manaqib. He starts off actually as a businessman. So it's interesting. He's a cloth merchant and he's selling clothes, etc. And then one day, interestingly, Ash-Sha'bi, the same one who wasn't too fond of al-Ra'i, he actually meets Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala and he asks him, ila man takhtalif, who do you spend time with? And he says, he mentions some individual's name who is a businessman. And so, lam a'ni hadha, Ash-Sha'bi says, I'm not referring to businessmen, I'm talking about ilm. Who do you spend time with as in scholars? So he says, ana qalilul ikhtilafi ilayhim. So then he says, لا تفعل هذا. So he says, فإني أرى فيك حركة ويقظة, to that effect. Again, I'm quoting these statements by heart because I can't even actually find them fully in my book right now because I'm having to go to the right page. But I know these quotes simply because I've spent a lot of time reading the manaqib of Imam Abu Hanifa, maybe too much. I think some people would find me like as a creep on Abu Hanifa. I think Abu Hanifa himself, if he saw me, he'd say, just stop now, that's enough. But it's because I'm writing the book, obviously. But so I think you could put a tentative number of maybe around his 20s is when he gets into knowledge, maybe even later, perhaps later. Allah knows best. He starts off with Ilmul Kalam, interestingly.
So that's actually quite inspirational for
100%.
a lot of the...
I quote this all the time in my gatherings. Like, elderly people, look at Abu Hanifa. He started off as a cloth merchant. I think I've got the number here as well when he started. But 100%, but what Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah says is that fortunately I didn't need to go very far. He says, كنت في معدن العلم والفقه فجالست أهله ولزمت فقيها من فقهائهم يقال له حماد فانتفعت به. And this quote is found in Al-Harithi's Kashf al-Athar and Muwaffaq al-Makki's Manaqib Abi Hanifa. Again, not to go into Al-Harithi, that's a whole separate discussion. So he says that I was in the mine of knowledge. I didn't need to go very far because Kufa already is a place wherein you could say it's bustling with ilm. And like I told you, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud being number one reason. The second one was Uthman radiallahu anhu. I forgot to mention Uthman radiallahu anhu's role. He allows the Sahaba to travel out a bit more than Umar radiallahu anhu. And the last one I would say is the idea that Ali radiallahu anhu made Kufa his main headquarters of his caliphate. Now, there's a whole history behind all of that as well, which we don't have time to go into. But Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala essentially is in Kufa. He says, I didn't need to travel very far. فَلَزِمْتُ فَقِيهًا مِّن فُقَهَائِهِمْ اسمه حماد ibn Abi Sulaiman, and he spends time with him. He starts off with looking into kalam quite a bit. Then one incident is mentioned in his biography, and it's like a woman comes and asks him a few questions about fiqh, and he doesn't know the answer to it. So then she goes and asks Hamad. Hamad immediately answers. As soon as Hamad answers these questions, he's like, who gave you these answers? He asked him, that guy gave it to me. That made him realize that I'm actually not helping people with just engaging in kalam directly. It's maybe time for me to engage in something that solves problems for people, which is fiqh.
Is this the same story where he travels to another place or something like that, and he's asked a question and he realizes, I don't know this question, and then he says, he makes the decision there and then that I'm gonna do mulazama of Hamad ibn Abi Sulaiman.
So there's two stories like that. One story is that gets him started with Hamad. Then there's a story where Hamad goes on a journey. He goes to travel somewhere, and Abu Hanifa thinks to himself, I think maybe I can become mustaghni from Hamad now.
I think I'm referring to this one.
And then suddenly, فَجَاءَتِ الْأَسْئِلَةِ, some questions came to me. I was like, whoa, I've never heard Hamad ever giving me any ruling for this. I don't know what he would even say. So he writes down all the answers. And then when Hamad comes back from the journey, he shows it to Hamad. And Hamad says, okay, you got this right, this one I would have said no. But what I want to highlight is that his discussion with Hamad is very different from what you would notice in the gatherings of Imam Malik. So this is something I highlight in the book as well. If you went to Imam Malik's gathering, you would probably not be allowed to talk. I think we know this from reading Tartib al-Madarik, reading the biography of Imam Malik. You're not allowed to talk. In fact, he used to have people that would hit you if you talked in his gathering. And we know Imam Shafi'i, obviously, in his Manaqib al-Shafi'i, in al-Madkhal ila Kitab al-Sunan of al-Bayhaqi, he mentions, كنت أتصفح صفحة رقيقة, when I would turn the pages in front of Imam Malik. The whole story where Imam Shafi'i meets Imam Malik for the first time, even that one is just incredible. He's so scared of Imam Malik. كان له هيبة. They say هيبة السلطان at times.
Is how this presence.
This presence. Whereas Imam Abu Hanifa, I mean, there's one funny quote of Imam Abu Hanifa. So Imam Malik, astaghfirullah al-azim, I hope people don't get upset with this quote, right? But so Imam Malik was obviously very much on the la adri. If you don't know, and this is very good for students, and that's why we always do mention this, that if you don't, لا يستحي من لا يعلم إذا سئل ما لا يعلم أن يقول لا أعلم. If you don't know something, say you don't know.
Yeah.
And Imam Malik, even his Asatidha, even Ibn Shihab al-Zuhri, that whole tradition of the Madinans and Ahlul Hadith in general. And again, I don't want to go into some discussion because I know ulama will start thinking I'm trying to say that the Ahlul Hadith were in Medina and the Ahlul Ra'i were in Kufa. That I'm not fully in agreement with that. I explain in detail in the book as well. But La Adri was something Imam Malik really liked. Imam Abu Hanifa, on the other hand, in Tariq Baghdad, you got a story where he says, someone tells him, why don't you just say La Adri? So he says, قل لا أدري مرتين. He says, لا أدري نصف العلم. Someone says that to him. So he says, say it twice, you've acquired all of ilm. So it's just a joke. Yeah. But he was not into this idea. He was more into the idea of we should answer their questions. And what I would say is the Hanafi Madhab, that is one of the reasons why it was adopted by a lot of the empires. They would be willing to give solutions and take a risk and kind of just like give an answer. So that Ahlul Ra'i is good at times, and at times, if it's not in the right hands, it can be abused.
I believe it was Sufyan ibn Uyayna, rahimahullah, who critiqued.
He comes to the masjid and he says, ألا تنهاهم عن رفع الصوت في المسجد؟ Says, دعهم فإنهم يتفقهون بهذا. Leave them, for indeed they will never learn fiqh unless by shouting and screaming. Not screaming, but like they would have debates. And that's really how your lessons in fiqh should be compared to your lessons in hadith. Your lessons in fiqh should not be teacher reading, translating. No, it should be debates. Like
no, Sheikh, subhanAllah, even me personally in my own life, and you can mention, I mean, it would be good to hear some of your own personal stories as well with your students and teaching and stuff. But me personally, when I've been studying and when we've done munaqasha over some of the points, and I'm defending the other position as if I believe it. Like properly defending the other position, and I want my sheikh to refute this position properly.
Absolutely.
Like really from the roots. This is what really gives you yaqeen in believing 100%. Why you believe what you believe, you know. I remember I was traveling once with some brothers, and there was a specific, I won't get into the actual mas'ala and stuff like that, but there was a specific issue they came and they asked me about and stuff like that, and then I realized, subhanallah, they were making statements, right? And some of these statements are like kind of like claims, you know. And my thing was, I remember thinking, a person shouldn't just make claims. They should know why they believe what they believe. They should have that, rusukh. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So, I mean, this is one of the best ways to get into fiqh, to really understand why you believe what you believe and get into some of the munaqashat and stuff like that. And even in Aqidah and other topics as well.
So playing devil's advocate, what you just said there, I'll give you a brilliant story of Abu Hanifa. There's so many like this. But near the end of his life, so this shows his attitude all the way till the day he passed away. This was his attitude. He used to let his students just have freedom. Like, you guys go for it. Go come at me. Basically, say what you want, and I'll present to you my dalail.
It'll give a lot of confidence to your students as well.
Yes, he was a genius. He was an absolute. These people today who attack Abu Hanifa and they wanna, I guarantee you, if they were in the life of Abu Hanifa would have they would not have a word to say. They would be like just circuit in front of him. They wouldn't. He'd give them an answer for everything. And the reality is, in Fada'il Abi Hanifa of Ibn Abil Awam, you've got this story where in his students, and this is a very reliable book, by the way. This is a book with, if you're going to go by Asanid, this book is the book to read, Ibn Abil Awam's. He's a student of Tahawi, etc. So his students come to him and he's been called to Baghdad because Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah ta'ala, he was very, and this is something which again he received a lot of critique for, he was a bit supportive of some rebellions that took place. Firstly, the Alid rebellions that took place around about 145 Hijri. He was even against the Umayyads, the very famous, I think, Zayd ibn Ali's revolt in the late Umayyad period, just before the Abbasid revolution. He actually, I think, sent money for that to support it. He was very I don't know how you want to word it. He wasn't happy with the government and he was not afraid to express himself, which again, that's a separate issue. So he was called to Baghdad because he spoke out, or he sponsored a kind of rebellion against al-Mansur. Al-Mansur obviously makes Baghdad in 145. He's called to Baghdad and he's asked to become a qadi. He refuses. So we jump to the end of his life. So it's good. We can kind of more or less, and then in the middle, we can just discuss a few things about him, inshallah, and then move on to his students. So one of the incidents that happens is that his students come to meet him whilst he's in prison in Baghdad. And they tell him, oh, a mas'ala happened in Kufa, by the way. And this was the ruling that we gave. And he says, that was the wrong ruling. So you gave the wrong ruling, guys. So they're like, so what's the correct ruling? So he gives another answer.
Yeah.
He says, this was the right answer. So he says, but they say to him, بَلَّدَتْكَ الْغُرْبَةِ ya Aba Hanifa. You know, being away from home, it's made you a bit silly. You're not thinking, right, how can it be that? So he أَقَامَ الْحُجَّةَ عَلَيْهim. He gave him dalail after dalail after dalail of proving his second opinion. And they're like, yeah, actually, you're right. You know what? You were right. So he says, what if I told you, you guys were wrong. I was also wrong. And the third opinion that I'm going to create now is actually the correct opinion. They say, هذا لا يكون. That cannot be. So now he gets them. He gives all the answers to his own dalail that he had given for the second position. Yeah. And he adopts the third one.
Yeah, subhanAllah.
By the way, this was also something that he was critiqued for, that he keeps changing his position. But this is why he was doing it, because it was to develop.
I was going to say, the story I was going to mention of Ibn Uyayna before is like how it was mentioned that 1,000 questions were posed to Imam Abu Hanifa, and he basically said, bring the questions, kind of thing. Yeah. So Ibn Uyayna was like critiquing him for that because, on one hand we have Malik. We have Malik, for example, who, as you mentioned, Malik was asked 40 questions from someone from Iraq and he answered 8 and he said, La adri, to the rest of them. The man came from Al-Andalus. It's a big travel, right? He's asking Imam Malik questions. Imam Malik is saying, La adri. Imam Malik, what should I tell the people? Tell them, Malik doesn't know, right? Yes. So subhanAllah, it shows you the different attitude. And you know what? There are things to learn from both approaches.
Exactly.
Right? There are things to learn from both approaches. Perhaps one of the things we can extract from Imam Abu Hanifa, because Imam Malik's position we speak about it a lot, generally speaking. Imam Abu Hanifa's position is, maybe the other aspect is, if you believe that you know something, if you're a student of knowledge, you know something and someone is asking you a question, then you should give them that
100%
knowledge. That
100%.
is part of the responsibility of learning.
That's how you solve problems for the ummah. If you're always going to say, there's a very famous story, it's mentioned in our fiqh books. This is more to do with fiqh inside the Hanafi Madhab. This individual is having an issue of talaq. Yes, I think it's mentioned in one of our books called Fatawa Tatar Khaniya. So he goes to one faqih, he asks him, this issue happened between my wife. Does the talaq take place? He said, go to this person. I'm not going to answer it. He goes, go to that person. So it's like everyone's passing it on to another person, not out of they don't know the answer, but out of humility, like a bit like the Imam Malik. In the end, the guy gets so tired. He's like, you know what? I'm just going to divorce my wife and let's just move on from this, because I'm not going to live in a state of shock here. Just forget it. She's divorced. He gives her 3 divorces and he moves on. So it can't be like that as well, where you make a mustafti, but the other side is also wrong. When you don't have the knowledge and you're trying to behave like Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala. So you've got to learn from both. But in that incident, Imam Abu Hanifa creates multiple opinions and he kind of basically gets his students to develop all of these different approaches, and then finally he gives them his position and he lets them choose whichever of the other opinions. And that brings us to like an important discussion, which is that for Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala, it was kind of an issue of looking at fiqh as separate from the Quran and Sunnah as the next stage. So one is knowing the Quran and Sunnah, and one is having a deeper understanding of the Quran and Sunnah such that you are creating the final stage, which is Sharia law. Sharia law for Abu Hanifa and the Hanafis in general was a very consistent system. So this is very, very important. In the Hanafi Madhab, half of the discussions of Ara'aita is all about the obsession of maintaining consistency, of wanting to ensure that all of our qawa'id are being maintained. And that's why the empires of the past, Allah knows best if this is one of the reasons at least, They would prefer the Hanafi madhab because it was very consistent. And we know this today. Like I mentioned this example in my book. Again, I'm open to critique if a better example could be presented. But if you park on a double yellow line and you get, for example, a £30 fine, but then you harm someone, literally you punch someone in the face, you assault someone and they give you a £20 fine, that would be like, that doesn't make sense. The double yellow line could have the potential of harming someone. Here, I actually did do the harm. So it brings me back to that Sa'id ibn al-Musayyab quote. Remember where he said, one finger. The Iraqis would just find that like, no, there's a problem, not with the hadith itself. They would find the problem in the naql. But we'll come to this, I guess I'm going on to the usul of the madhab.
Yeah.
That the idea of there was an obsession with qawaid.
Yeah.
And there was an obsession with how these qawaid have come about. And that's where we get this idea that Abu Hanifa gives preference to qiyas over hadith.
Maybe this is a good time to speak about the whole niza' between Ahl al-Hadith wa Ahl al-Ra'i.
Yeah.
Or, you know, like historically speaking. And I guess this is the elephant in the room, right?
Yeah.
That scholars from the Ahl al-Hadith had some very harsh words to say about Ahl al-Ra'i. And essentially Imam Abu Hanifa and his way of doing fiqh, etc. The scholars of hadith, you know, their madhab was إذا صح الحديث فهو مذهبي, right? So how the thing is, the reason why I like your approach is because your approach is not a dismissive approach to the fact that this actually happened. Because for me, from a historical perspective, this was a reality.
Yeah.
The Ahl al-Hadith, they critiqued the Hanafis
100%.
and critiqued, to say the least. Okay. And now we come to a situation where both of us can agree. Of course, you yourself as a Hanafi and me, myself not being a Hanafi. But we both have the same conclusion that Imam Abu Hanifa kana imaman min a'immatil Islam. He was an imam from the imams of Islam. So now this conclusion, it's about how we reach this conclusion, despite the fact that you had a Quran of Imam Abu Hanifa, some of the scholars of hadith critiquing him.
Yeah.
So what is your kind of explanation in brief of
100%.
this phenomena?
100%. I want to explain this phenomena in one of the ways in which I've done it in my masjid. In our local masjid, I've explained it to you like this. Do you guys have those like sidewalks, right, where the person presses a button? There are no cars. The red light is simply to let that person pass by. Do you have that in London? Because we have that obviously in the north.
As in, it tells the person who's walking that you can walk now?
No, that's there. But it actually stops the cars as well. It's like a zebra crossing, but because it's so busy, the light will actually go red.
No, I don't think we have that.
You don't have that, okay.
No, we have normal red lights,
Yeah. I wish we had that in Blackburn, where we don't have this, but subhanAllah. So what it is I'm going to explain the process like this. You can even express it as a red light, but it's better to think of it as like a zebra crossing, which the individual has to press a light, and then it will go from green. It was always green, unless someone presses a button, then they want to cross the road.
Okay.
If they want to cross the road, they'll press a button. It'll go from green, it'll flash yellow, and then it'll go red.
Okay.
Everyone needs to wait. This guy needs to cross the road.
Fine.
He's crossed the road. I've seen this. Honestly, people have told me, no, I don't know how I would behave if this happened. But I've seen it with my own eyes, people behaving very differently. Which is after the person has crossed the road, is it going to go from red to green straight away, or is it going to take its time?
Yeah.
But the person has crossed the road.
Yeah.
What would you do if you were in the car now? It's still red.
This is a trick question, right?
No, there is no right or wrong answer to this.
Yeah.
What would your approach be, Sheikh?
I would probably just go. Khalas, he's crossed the road.
I'm telling you the amount of people I have seen who will actually wait. I think that's the majority.
Yeah.
Actually, I feel guilty sometimes carrying on driving because I'm like,
if it's a red light, then I would wait. If it's a red light, then I would wait.
Because the person's crossed, and the whole purpose of the red light, you'd still wait.
Yeah, I would wait. If it was a red light, I would wait.
Subhanallah.
If it was a red light, because the thing is, I don't want to. Maybe there's a camera. I don't want to get a ticket or something.
Okay,
like
that's
that.
another reason.
This logic.
Okay,
right.
Okay. That's another way of looking at things. So you can see it's not black and white, right?
Yeah.
I would probably drive on unless there was a camera there, in which case I'd be.
Yeah.
In which case I'd probably send a letter to DVLA to say, what's the point of the camera if it's not realized that the person's already crossed the road? What are we doing, wasting our time waiting here?
Yeah.
Even if it's 5 seconds, that's 5 seconds of my day being wasted here, of me just waiting for the oxygen to pass through.
Yeah.
He's gone. Do you get what I'm saying? So this was the reason that example is a bit long-winded, but the reason why that example is very important is people will notice themselves
Yeah.
in their life as well. And Sheikh Ahmed Saleh, he mentions this, Ayman Saleh, sorry. He says, the inqisamun nas, and this is from the time of the Sahaba, where some of the Sahaba would look beyond just what the words are saying. And we've discussed this in the car about read your salah in Banu Qurayza.
The hadith, famous
So
hadith.
the very famous hadith where Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam says that do not read your Asr Salah, or whether it was Dhuhr Salah, there's some ikhtilaf, but do not read the Salah except in Banu Qurayza. We will get to Banu Qurayza and we will read our Salah. Some of the Sahaba on the road, Asr Salah came, they read it. They said, no, lam yurid minna hada. He never intended this. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam wasn't telling us to just let Salah become qada. He was trying to tell us to rush to Banu Qurayza so that we can read our Salah in Banu Qurayza.
That's why he said it.
Yes. The other group, they
said
actually
no.
read it. They let the Salah go qada.
Yeah.
And there's some ikhtilaf, did they let it go qada, or was it from the mustahab waqt? We won't
Yeah.
get into all that.
Yeah.
When Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam found out, lam yaqul shay, he never said anything.
Yeah.
He never said anything. He
Yeah.
kind of just like, interesting on this, by the way, Ibn Hazm al-Zahiri, he says, if I was there,
I would have prayed.
I would have prayed it.
Yeah,
I would have-
that's
So it
it's
just
good. He
shows-
said that it shows iltizam to his
it
mother.
it shows
Yeah.
iltizam.
Yeah.
So you can see the kind of like literalist approach. I wouldn't want to call it literalist because that comes with a bit of a negative connotation, but like sticking more to the letter of the law
Yeah.
and the spirit of the law. And that's what this
Yeah.
ikhtilaf between Ahlul Ra'i and Ahlul
Yeah.
Hadith was, more or less.
Yeah.
It was more about the Hanafis viewing things more from a qawa'id perspective, and they would view themselves as like kind of like the inheritors of the manhaj of Umar radiallahu anhu. There are at least, some of them have made them into like 10, there's rasail, thalathu rasail fi muwafaqati Umar ibn al-Khattab. You can make a full list of masail wherein Umar radiallahu anhu has actually, if you look on the apparent, he's gone against the qawl of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But he's done so because he's looked at the ma'na and he's looked at the maqasid and he's looked at the illah behind it, and he sees. The mu'allafatul qulub is a good example. Salatul, even a few other places as well wherein he feels we should read salah behind maqam Ibrahim, and then that verse comes down to. So you can see he's, he does look beyond. Abdullah ibn Masud was the same thing. Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah was the same thing. So in the book, I've actually made 3 kind of distinguishing features between the Ahlul Ra'i and Ahlul Hadith. Within the Ahlul Hadith, there was generally an approach of being a bit more letter of the law, which is also very good. So if you ask them a fatwa, it would generally be Qala Allah, Qala Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And some people will love that. That's 100%. That's fine. And it should be like that, 100%. This is not to say the Hanafis wouldn't do that. The Hanafis would just go a bit beyond this. At times they would just say, okay, Qala Allah wa Qala Rasul, but we need to kind of determine, okay, what is going to be the consistent approach that we can give that's going to be a practical solution for people in their lives. So they would look beyond just the statements. Another thing is that assessing the ahadith would be through a different methodology for the Ahlul Ra'i. Abu Hanifa's madhab is essentially the final version of the Ahlul Ra'i madhab, and it is the madhab of the people of Ra'i. And they would assess ahadith more from the perspective of amal. What can we do amal upon? Yes, the hadith is thabit, whether it's thabit or not, they were concerned about that, definitely, but they were more concerned about, was this something that is a part of Sharia law? Remember the 3-stage process, Quran and Sunnah at the top, then fiqh is how you understand the Quran and Sunnah, and then the final thing you come to is a consistent Sharia law. And this is going to be like, it's going to be loads of things, and there's going to be loads of things that will not be Quran and Sunnah. It'll just be ma'ani, legal meanings, legal fiqhi ideas that are being discussed.
Yeah.
But those legal ma'ani are istiqra'. They have been understood from various nusus of Sharia. And Imam Malik would have a similar approach to this, by the way, as Abu Hanifa. And so when he's looking at it from this perspective, he is thinking, okay, there's this many ahadith that are on the topic of justice and being fair. So when he comes to the hadith of Musarrat, hadith al-Musarrat is a very famous hadith. It's in Bukhari, it's in other books as well. The idea is that a person basically, he's selling a cow or camel or whatever it is, and on purpose, he's not milked the cow or camel for a few days. So it looks like the udders are really big.
Yeah.
Right? Then he sells the cow. The person buys it. After a few days, he realizes, whoa, the udders of this camel are not actually that big. So he wants to give the camel back.
Exactly, yeah.
So the hadith, to the best of my knowledge, again, I've got it in the book, but I don't want to spend too much time trying to look for it. The narration is by Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, Sayyiduna Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu. The hadith seems to suggest this idea that you give it back and then you give 1 sa' or a few sa' of tamar.
Of dates, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
The Hanafis looked at this and they were like, okay, this isn't consistent, not with our thought, not with our qiyas, but what we've understood from istiqra of nusus al-sharia, of amal mutawarath from in Ahlul Kufa. And Kufa's amal is also in Quduri, in one of the places we come to one of his books, he says the amal of Ahlul Kufa should be stronger than the amal of Ahlul Madinah. But I wouldn't go that far, right? But I would just say the amal of Ahlul Kufa is very important. There were many great scholars who I never mentioned, I forgot to mention, al-Ijli says نزل الكوفة 1500 من الصحابة in his معرفة الثقات. In Tabaqat of Ibn Sa'ad, there's a statement of Ibrahim al-Nakha'i where he says, he's speaking about the 2 rak'ah salah before Maghrib. He says, نزل الكوفة 70 من أهل البدر و300 من أصحاب I don't want to quote the Arabic exactly because I might get it wrong, but the people of in Hudaybiyah, the treaty of the Bay'atul Ridwan, Ahli Bay'atul Ridwan. 300 from those who participated in the Bay'atul Ridwan, and 70 from Ahlul Badr came in Kufa. So the amal of Ahlul Kufa was very strong. Imam Abu Hanifa is looking at all of this, and not just him, Ibrahim al-Nakha'i, the whole tradition of Kufa is looking at all of this. They're looking at this hadith and they're not going to deny the hadith, but they're going to interpret the hadith that maybe it was waqi'atu hal, maybe it was a certain incident that took place. There's a context behind the hadith.
The issue here for them is, why is the tamar going back, right?
Why is the
tamar being added?
Tamar. Sorry, I thought you said turmoil. So I was just
no, the tamar. Yeah.
There is turmoil here for sure.
So one of the views,
So even in Ibn Rushd in his Bidayat al-Mujtahid, when he discusses this as well, he gives numerous reasons as to why the Hanafis don't practice upon this. Amongst them, he says it's qawa'id. It just doesn't fit with this idea of al-kharaj bid-daman, etc. idea. It doesn't fit with this key concepts of Sharia. So you can see it's a bit of a maqasidi approach. It is a bit of a maslaha based approach. It is a bit of a qawaid based approach. So that was another reason. And the final reason, Sheikh, if I can just
there is an explanation to this hadith that is mentioned, that the tamr was mentioned bimuqabil al-laban.
Yes.
Because the milk was taken out.
Yeah. So the Hanafis would say to that is that why would that be stipulated to, you don't know how much laban you used. So even there's not adl and insaf. And adl and insaf are one of the key maqasid of Sharia, key ideas of Sharia are there. They're not being maintained. So do you understand? The Hanafis are looking at amal. They're looking at the matan. Always, every Hanafi in the past. Because fuqaha look at amal, muhaddithun generally look a bit more at thubut. And I am a big believer in this division of labor, which is, one is it thabit, then is it ma'mul bihi? That's a different process. Ma'mul bihi is whether it is a part of a consistent sharia or not. And this is something Ibn Ashur mentions in Maqasid al-Shariat al-Islamiyya. Before him, Al-Qarafi, in his Al-Ihkam, he has a whole section wherein not everything that Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam does is meant to be like he's done it for the entire ummah, in the sense that it's meant to be a part of, like it's not the default ruling. At times, Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam might be giving it because of the person that's come in front of him. And Jassas gives numerous examples in the Hanafi madhab of, for example, Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, when a young man comes and asks him a question, can I kiss my wife whilst I'm fasting? He says no. When an old man comes, he says, yeah, it's fine. So you can see he changes his ruling. So Qarafi says mansabul imama, mansabul qada. Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam has all of these different roles that he plays. And then he plays the role of mansabul shari, which is the default.
I think we can speak about this more when we come to usul.
Okay.
Because there are some things that I wanted to mention as well on the usul and stuff like that. Because some people who are listening to you, Sheikh, and I know this is definitely not your intention, but like some people who are listening to you may take some of what you've mentioned about Ahlul Ra'i, for example, and interpret it as, okay, so Ahlul Hadith and the Madhahib that are attributed to Ahlul Hadith, so the Malikiyya, the Shafi'iyya and the Hanabila, they don't have the concept of an illah present, for example. They don't have principles present. They don't have, and obviously that isn't the case.
That isn't the case.
Yeah, right. They're the Shafi'is, the Hanabila, the Malikiyya, they do have also, Imam Malik is known for this as well, that he had, and Imam Shafi'i as well, that they had fiqh and they had hadith, etc. and all of that. So the other madhahib, obviously, but the point about Ahlul Ra'i and Ahlul Hadith, one of the things I wanted to get from you is, what is the understanding for people? Because you mentioned this, right, in your book. You mentioned about how if you're a Hanafi student and you're reading Bukhari and you're reading these big ai*imma who are speaking about your Imam.
Yes.
So what's going to happen for you, like for the Hanafi student? And I like the way that you've done that, because you want to explain to the Hanafi student now How do you understand these aqwal and stuff like that? That point, I think we do need to speak a little bit more about that point.
100%.
So what is the explanation on that?
Yeah. So
You went a bit into the tariq, like what I think you were getting at is
the usul. I think we'll come to the usul a bit later.
explaining the difference in usul for the Ahlul Ra'i and the Ahlul Hadith.
So let's come to that later.
Yeah.
Let's look at kind of like the raw facts on the ground, which is if you're reading Sahih Bukhari, which we read in our final year in our classes as well. I mean, who can ever doubt the legacy of Imam al-Bukhari rahmatullah alayhi, and Imam Muslim and all of these great muhaddithun who we value tremendously.
Of course.
Without their efforts, our deen would not have been, we wouldn't have one of the best sources of the sunnah that we have for us today is the best source is a hadith. We don't have what Imam Malik had, which is amal. We don't have what Abu Hanifa had, which is amal. There is no amal. Amalu wa ahlu London or amalu ahli Blackburn or UK, etc. Astaghfirullah. So we don't have the vantage point that they had. And this is a separate problem, which I'll come to. And I'm going to answer this question right now about how how should a Hanafi deal with this? But I want to mention one more problem, which you're more well-versed in history than I am, definitely. So you might know the actual term for this. But how I explain it to my students is, I call it something which some might find is controversial, the TARDIS problem. So the TARDIS problem is that with the lack of a TARDIS, Sheikh, do you know Doctor Who or no?
Doctor Who, sorry?
Doctor Who, Sheikh doesn't know what Doctor Who is. Inna lillah.
Doctor Who?
Doctor Who.
Yeah, of course I know Doctor Who, yeah.
Right, okay.
Oh, TARDIS, you mean the actual, the
TARDIS,
the
right.
police box or
the
whatever
police
it is,
box. So because we don't have a TARDIS, we can't go back into time.
Yeah.
We can't go, what was actually Abu Hanifa doing? What was Imam Malik? We don't know. And therefore, and I use the term prisoners of history. We can only have what the people of the past have passed on to us. And Abu Hanifa and Imam Abu Yusuf and Imam Muhammad don't write down their methodology. So I know I'm still touching on the usul idea, but the idea is that we only know the past because of what the past tells us and passes on to us. So when it comes to this issue, now coming back to this idea of why was there so much enmity between the two? So why was there so much enmity between the two? I would say that the primary reason could be 100% misunderstandings. That is also there. At times we have clear indications that they were fully aware. For example, Al-Awza'i says, لا ننقم على أبي حنيفة أنه رأى كلنا نراه لكن ننقم عليه أنه يأتي إليه الحديث فيخالفه. We don't attack Abu Hanifa that he has رأي كلنا نراه. تأويل مختلف الحديث Ibn Qutayba narrates this statement.
And Sheikh, to be honest, the understanding that Ahl al-Hadith على الإطلاق, just to qualify my statement even further, to make it safer, to say that they never understood Ahl al-Ra'i.
This is incorrect.
I think that's it's a bit of a simplistic understanding.
It's too simplistic.
Yeah.
So I think the ultimate reason is methodology, and the best quotation and the best explanation. You will find this approach of just attacking the muhaddithun, and that happens. You're just you're just adding fuel to the fire.
Yeah.
The best way to understand it is that this was passion from both sides on methodological issues, and this will happen. I don't want to encourage people to start researching the mushajarat al-Sahaba, but I connect it to the idea of mushajarat al-Sahaba, which is passion on a certain topic.
Sahaba
which is
differed on things.
And it led to, yes, 100%. There's no need to deny our history where there was a few battles that took place. It is what it is. I prefer the statement of Sheikh Dhafar Ahmed Uthmani when he says something, Sheikh Shabir Ahmed Uthmani, who's a very, very big scholar, he's author of Fathul Mulhim, etc. He says something along the lines of, and I've quoted it, the full quote in the book. I love this quote. He says, we love the muhaddithun for their positions, and we have no enmity for them for what they said about Abu Hanifa. It was out of ikhlas. It was out of sin. They thought what Abu Hanifa is doing contradicts Islam, and they thought he is yahdimul Islam, as they said. Or did they say he's urwatan, or to that effect, he's breaking down the whole, he's breaking everything down from Islam. That's what they said about Abu Hanifa. So we have no enmity for them for saying that, because they was out of sincerity. And when you're passionate about a certain topic, you feel someone is harming deen, out of sincerity, you might say certain things. What's interesting, however, and this is where my respect for Abu Hanifa obviously goes out of the window. It goes, sorry, not out of the window, but like it goes beyond mention, is I've not to this day come across a quote of Abu Hanifa explicitly attacking those who attacked him. In fact, the opposite. I found statements wherein, again, we don't go by dreams fully. When some people saw him in their dream after he had passed away, why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive you? again, I'm not saying dreams are everything, I'm just saying, he says, بِكَلَامِ النَّاسِ فِيَّ بِمَا لَمْ أَقُلْ بِقَوْلِ النَّاسِ فِيَّ بِمَا لَمْ أَكُنْ عَلَيْهِ, to that effect. Ibn Abd al-Barr narrates it in his Al-Intiqa, that people said things about me which were just not true. But he held his tongue, he didn't say anything. So passion comes through. Imam Bukhari has said some comments about Abu Hanifa. We love both, Abu Hanifa and Al-Bukhari. We love Imam Muslim, even though he's made some disparaging comments about Abu Hanifa. We love them both. We've got Al-Uqayli, we've got Ibn Adi, we've got Abu Zur'a al-Razi. The list goes, Imam Ahmed, rahmatullah alayhi. Of course, there is some comments that were made, but we love all of our A'imah because it was passion. It was passion, it was methodology differences. Just like we love all the Sahaba, as part of Ahlul Sunnah, we love every single Sahabi, despite the Sahaba having differences amongst themselves. You know, even within the Sahaba, you notice this difference in methodology, which we'll come to in the Usul discussion. Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu's approach were a bit more, you could say, they preferred to stick a little bit more to exactly what Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said. Whereas Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, Ibn Abbas, they would prefer to question. They would prefer to ask. In fact, when Ibn Abbas asked Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu a question, and Abu Hurairah gets upset. Like, and he says, Yasim, أَنَا تَوَضَّأُ مِنَ الْحَمِيمِ, when it comes to eating, doing wudu after eating meat, camel meat. Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu was asked a question by Ibn Abbas in regards to, like, why do we do this? Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu is not happy with it. So it's that inqisamun nas of two approaches towards looking at Quran and Sunnah, difference in methodologies, then a few things added on. I think it would be important to not leave out the mihna. I think the mihna plays a huge role. So the mihna is, for our viewers who might not know what the mihna is, the mihna takes place, I think, around 128 Hijri, and this was carried out by Al-Ma'mun, Al-Abbasi. And there's a lot to say about the mihna, but the mihna, that, remember, after, so should we come to Abu Yusuf and Imam Muhammad, and then we'll come to the mihna, because Abu Yusuf rahimahullah ta'ala is the primary student of Imam Abu Hanifa. Two students.
Just before you go to the student, Sheikh, I just wanted to add another thing as well about Imam Abu Hanifa. That Imam Abu Hanifa, after all of this is something that people need to bear in mind when they discuss Imam Abu Hanifa. Just on that topic, as we leave that topic about Ahlul Ra'i and Ahlul Hadith. One thing people need to understand is that after this, the scholars that came after, we could say there is ijma' of the ummah regarding the imamah of Imam Abu Hanifa, right? So there is a way in which we treat some of these statements from scholars, you know, when Aqran speak about Aqran, when people who are peers to each other, when they speak about each other, etc. And, you know, there are different explanations as to why what happened. But the conclusion, and this is something I want to emphasize, the conclusion is the same. Imam Abu Hanifa kana imaman min a'immat al-Islam. Right? How you get to that, okay, you know, we can have some differing and stuff like that, okay, regarding this, but the conclusion is there. And this is something people need to understand. And for those brothers who, you know, for example, really respect and look up to, for example, Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, his book Raf' al-Malam was essentially, you know, it could be argued that one of the reasons it was authored, or one of the people who he's actually coming to defend, are the Hanafis and Imam Abu Hanifa, right? And in the beginning of the book, he mentions something that people need to bear in mind about Imams. These Imams like Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Ahmad, and this is a comment from me before I bring the quote from the book, Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Ahmad, Imam al-Shafi'i, and many of the other Imams of Islam, they were not idiots.
100%.
They were not silly people. They were not the type of people that the Prophet ﷺ is telling you, sit down, and they say in response, oh, Ya Rasulullah, I don't want to sit down. I don't want to follow what you're saying to me. And this is one of the meanings in the beginning that he begins with, that people should know that these A'imma of Islam, they do not intentionally go against a saying of the Prophet ﷺ, to do mukhalafa of the Prophet ﷺ. Because mukhalafa of the Prophet ﷺ, if the Prophet ﷺ, imagine he's telling you to do things, imagine he's alive and he's saying you to do things, you're saying, no, Ya Rasulullah, no, we don't want to do this. 100%. This is the tasawwur that some people have. This type of attitude with the Prophet ﷺ may even lead you to kufr, let alone other things. So we need to really put into place what we're speaking about.
100%.
And now, Sheikh, we can smoothly go on to some of the students of...
So Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala has two important students. So it's interesting to understand his two students. So Imam Abu Yusuf rahimahullah ta'ala is a student of his, and so is Imam Muhammad. You can call one the senior student and call the other student, Imam Muhammad, as the junior student.
Yeah.
So Imam Muhammad is the junior student, Imam Abu Yusuf is the senior student. The senior student and junior student also have a teacher-student relationship. So the senior student also taught the junior one, which is Imam Muhammad. So you got Imam Abu Hanifa teaches Imam Abu Yusuf and Imam Muhammad. Imam Abu Yusuf teaches Imam Muhammad as well.
So is this an accurate way to put it? That you have Imam Abu Hanifa at the top.
Yep.
Then you have Qadi Abu Yusuf. Then you have Imam Muhammad ibn Hassan.
Yep.
And then on the same level you have Zufar, rahimahullah, and you have Hassan ibn Ziyad.
Yes and no. The reason why is I would put Imam Muhammad and Imam Abu Yusuf and Hassan ibn Ziyad and Imam Zufar all on the same level, more or less.
Okay.
They're all students of Abu Hanifa. In fact, Zufar was older than Abu Yusuf.
Yeah.
It's just that he passed away very young. Very young as in he passed away a lot quicker after Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah. Imam Abu Hanifa passed away 150, Imam Zufar 157, Imam Abu Yusuf 182, Imam Muhammad 189. So you can see the one who lives the longest, obviously, naturally, he was very young when Imam Abu Hanifa passed away, Imam Muhammad. He was about 18. Wallahu alam. And Imam Abu Yusuf rahimahullah ta'ala, if I recall correctly, I'm not going to try to guess his death date. I've got it in the book, but I should know it. Astaghfirullah. But he was younger than Imam. Imam Malik was born in 96. So he was younger than, so I think 102. If I'm not mistaken, Allahu alam, 102 is sticking in my mind. Allah knows best. Imam Muhammad, I think 132. Allahu alam. So you've got these ai*imma. Imam Abu Yusuf rahimahullah ta'ala is born, obviously, same place, Kufa, all of these places are essentially the same. However, after the demise of Imam Abu Hanifa, remember Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah passed away in prison, right? This is important. According to some narrations, in sajda, in prostration. And it's muttafaq alayh that he passed away in prison. Right?
We should mention that he passed away in prison because
he was
when Abu Ja'far al-Mansur wanted Imam Abu Hanifa to become the Qadi, he was refusing.
So I think some people will get confused. I thought you just said al-Mansur called him to Baghdad to kind of punish him for taking part in the rebellion. Why would you want him to become a Qadi? For that very reason, to punish him. Because you got to understand, in those early days, becoming a Qadi was not something they all wanted to become. So, I mean, from amongst the Orientalists or Western writers, you got Wail Hallaq in his book, The Origins and Evolution of Islamic Law, chapter 7, right at the end, he speaks about why early scholars never actually wanted to become qadis very much. Unlike today where everyone wants to become an MP, right? But
or a qadi.
Or qadi, counselor, even a counselor. Everyone wants to be a counselor, right? SubhanAllah. But for good reasons, inshallah. So Imam Abu Hanifa really did not want to be a qadi. Abu Ja'far al-Mansur knew that, and perhaps that's why he called him and offered him the qadi. That gives him an excuse to throw him in prison. Because the power used to lie with ulama in those days. The stories of Imam Malik and Harun al-Rashid, where Imam Malik, you know, Harun al-Rashid comes and he wants to acquire Muwatta from Imam Malik. And Imam Malik stays at home. Like, I'm not coming to your palace, you come to my place. So
and then he wants Imam Malik to read the Muwatta to him or read a hadith to him.
Never. Imam Malik wouldn't read at all. That's why Imam Muhammad, by the way, when he goes to study under Imam Malik, straight after Imam Abu Hanifa passes away, he says to Ash-Shafi'i later on, Imam Muhammad is a teacher of Ash-Shafi'i. That, by the way, all of this shows that our ai*imma are a family.
I wanted to mention this point.
This is a family.
I wanted to mention this point.
Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Malik themselves, they meet quite a bit, especially around the time when in the Abbasid revolution is taking place. Imam Abu Hanifa is in Makkah and Medina, and they spend a lot of time together, and they have debates and they have discussions, and they have a lot of love and mahabba for one another. Imam Muhammad, the student of Abu Hanifa, the student of the Imam Ahli Ra'i, if you want to say it like that, he studies under Imam Malik. Imam Malik has another teacher called Ash-Shafi'i. Ash-Shafi'i studies under Imam Muhammad. Can you see the triangle? Like Imam Ash-Shafi'i is studying under Imam Malik and Imam Muhammad. Imam Muhammad has studied under Imam Malik.
And Ash-Shafi'i is the teacher of Ahmed.
Ash-Shafi'i is the teacher of Imam Ahmed. And Imam Ahmed in his early days studied under Abu Yusuf as well. And he says that through his own comments. So essentially what we're saying here is that Imam Abu Yusuf rahimahullah ta'ala, Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala refuses to be a qadi, and he's thrown into prison. That's made as an excuse to throw him into prison. He's poisoned, whatever, Allah knows best, he passes away.
Yeah.
Imam Abu Yusuf rahimahullah ta'ala,
Yes.
he ends up becoming the Qadi al-Qudat, the main Qadi
Yes.
of the Abbasid Empire for at least 3 of the Abbasid Khalifas, Harun al-Rashid I think being the last one, and then I think Al-Hadi, Al-Mahdi and Harun al-Rashid, I forget the order of Al-Hadi and Al-Mahdi. But in any case, all 3 he's a Qadi al-Qudat. I think there's something there that I want to mention there. It shows the teacher and student relationship between Imam Abu Yusuf and Imam Abu Hanifa. This idea that you must do everything your teacher did.
Yeah.
You step out of line, you're off. You know, it's not like that as well. You can see Imam Abu Yusuf, he probably did hear maybe a few sound bites from certain people who might have said to him, oh, your ustad was very much against this. He died literally not to be a qadi. But he did what he felt was the best for his...
This is a very beautiful point, and this also shows that it also maybe we can even see the tarbiyah of Imam Abu
100%.
Hanifa there in making
100%.
students independent and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I think one of the best things a teacher can do for his student is give his student a level of independence. And you know, Sheikh, isn't that funny, right? Where usually you would assume in human nature is to make people just follow you. That's what people would assume, isn't it? Right?
Yeah.
You know, make a cult, make your own cult, make people follow you, follow you around and just do taqleed of you, right? When in reality, and I'm sure we'll get to this, I mean, the Hanafi madhab, we can mention it now, the Hanafi madhab isn't just, it's a misunderstanding to assume that the Hanafi madhab is Imam Abu Hanifa.
Not at all.
These were other scholars
Not at all,
that became pillars of the madhab.
Yeah.
And actually in cases, as-Sahiban, you know, Muhammad ibn Hassan and Qadi Abu Yusuf, they do mukhalafa of Abu
100%,
Hanifa, right?
100%.
So it just goes to show you a level of independence that the teacher, and this is where the student should always respect the teacher,
100%.
right? The teacher giving that level of independence to the student where the student feels like, you know, I can do what I need to do. Because, you know, I believe if you want to be a good talib ilm, if you want to be a good scholar, if you want to be a good teacher, you also should have a level of independent thinking.
100%.
Right?
And independent,
so it's a beautiful reflection.
The independent thinking doesn't mean you need to do mukhalafa of your ustad.
It doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean that.
It just means at times you might want to do tawaqquf. This was the position of my sheikh. That's his position.
Yeah.
I don't know. I still need to do a bit of research on this.
But I'm not you may not even be convinced.
You might not be convinced. The main thing you need to be doing is staying on top of what you need to be doing is essentially staying on top of your ibadah, ta'alluq ma'Allah, develop. This is the thing. These people, they had done what we refer to as like tazkiyah of themselves as well. They were very much connected to Imam Abu Yusuf. Will come to it. لما ولي القضاء, when he became a qadi, كان يصلي, he used to read 200 rak'ah nafal every single day. Now, honestly, when I think of that, I think that's impossible. But even if you take this as an exaggeration, chalo, someone might turn around and say to me, 200 is impossible, that's too much time. Can you not even at least admit that that means he used to read quite a lot, at least in the day? There seems to be some narrations here suggesting so this ta'alluq ma'Allah was very, very strong.
Also the ibadah of Imam Abu Hanifa, which we didn't speak about, but the ibadah.
كان يسمى الوتد لقيامه بالليل. He used to be called a pillar because he used to spend his entire night in tahajjud. Now, today's student will turn around and say, Abu Hanifa was weak in hadith.
Yeah.
This is a man who used to spend his whole night in tahajjud. You sleep the whole night and you have the nerve to call him. It irks me because I know my state and we read about these scholars and it's like we're so far from them. Like that really, you know, it troubles me, to be honest. When you read some of these stories, it's really... Like Abu Yusuf rahimahullah ta'ala, his connection with his teacher, he says, مات ابن لي فلم أحضر جهازه ولا دفنه وتركته على جيراني وأقربائي مخافة أن يفوتني من أبي حنيفة شيء لا تذهب حسرته عني. He says, one of my children passed away. I didn't even attend the janaza. I left. Again, I'm not encouraging people to, but this was his mahabba, ta'alluq with his sheikh, etc. as well.
It shows you something.
But despite that, later on in his life, you can see he adopts the Qadi al-Qudat position, but that doesn't stop him from having respect for his sheikh. He knows I've adopted a different path in life, as in I've decided it's best for my community to become a qadi.
Not even when he would pick Qudah, he would pick Qudah on the madhab of Imam Abu Hanifa 100%. And stuff.
He would do that, and like we said, like this level of dedication he had to Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala it still allowed him to be critical. And there is actually a number of masail, at least a third of masail I would say, wherein he does contradict Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala. He stays in the company of Imam Abu Hanifa for 17 years. And you know, he would actually make dua for Imam Abu Hanifa after every salah. Allahumma ghfir li wa li walidayya wa li Abi Hanifa. Wallah, forgive me, my parents, and Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala. And as we know that there's so many stories about him, his teachers as well, there are so many. He supposedly, wallahu alam, he definitely meets Imam Malik. We do know he meets Imam Malik because that's where we have that very famous story of the, what do they call it, the saw of Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam that he used to use when he would perform wudu, etc. He goes to Medina, al-Munawwara, and he spends time with Imam Malik, and Imam Malik actually shows him the saw, and that's when he actually changes his position on what was the saw of Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So we know he definitely meets Imam Malik. He does not meet Imam Shafi'i. Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala, born in Gaza, moves to Makkah, then studies under Imam Malik in Medina Munawwara, comes back to supposedly Yemen. From Yemen, he is brought to Baghdad. And remember, after this is interesting, we'll come to this when we look at the development of the madhab throughout the history. After 150, or at least after the demise of Imam Abu Hanifa, Kufa does not remain a center of Hanafism simply because it's been surpassed by Baghdad. After Baghdad is made in 145, this is the city to be in. This is the cosmopolitan city.
And since we're discussing historically, 150 when Imam Abu Hanifa passes away, Imam Shafi'i is born.
Yes, yeah.
Right? That's so Imam Shafi'i is born now. He comes into the picture.
Yeah.
SubhanAllah.
So Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala, then from there he studies. And Imam Shafi'i, for me, and this is where people say, oh, you know, this madhahib, this ta'assub. Who said, I consider, even though I've read quite a bit on the biography of Imam Abu Hanifa, I feel, when I read the books of a Shafi'i, I feel a sense of like this man was a genius beyond the imagination. I read I read it with my students, and they will testify to the knowledge of Imam Shafi'i that we were just learning from. We read, obviously, Kitab al-Radd ala Muhammad ibn al-Hasan, which is a challenging book. I read that on my own, and then with the students I went through Kitab Ibtal al-Istihsan, which is in al-Umm. You just see the knowledge of Imam Shafi'i. In any case, when he goes to Baghdad, he meets Imam Muhammad for the first time. But that's in 184. So Imam Abu Yusuf has already passed away in 182. Sorry, he meets him in 183. So Imam Muhammad and Imam Shafi'i meet and spend time with one another for at least about 7 years, we could say, approximately. And in those 7 years, these two, again, it's a student-teacher relationship. Imam Muhammad's the teacher to Imam Shafi'i. But Imam Shafi'i comes as a Maliki to Baghdad. He's a Maliki, essentially. He believes in Amal. Then he has this set of debates with Imam Muhammad, and that leads him to change his opinions on certain issues, which just tells you that this also a student-teacher relationship, but still they were willing to debate with one another, disagree on certain issues. And that's how fiqh essentially developed. So Imam Abu Yusuf rahimahullah ta'ala, when he passes away, there's so much to say about Imam Abu Yusuf rahimahullah ta'ala that, you know, maybe it will take a bit too much time, but Yahya ibn Ma'in, all of them, they all had good comments to make about Imam Abu Yusuf rahimahullah ta'ala. Obviously, him becoming a Qadi al-Qudat, remember one thing, Muhaddithun in general had a little bit of a negative attitude towards anyone who became a Qadi. It's not blanket ruling, but it would automatically be a sense of he's become a Qadi. And so therefore you do have some disparaging comments about Imam Abu Yusuf.
Do you think that's because of qurb min al-hakim?
100%. And I think that just proves the sincerity of our ulama, that they weren't like political puppets or anything like that. They were, if anything, they wanted to completely stay away from all that as much as possible. So he probably played an important role. Now, this is where I want to kind of clarify something which might be a bit interesting for some people. This idea that Imam Abu Yusuf only would choose Hanafi qadis, I think that's true to some degree, but my research seems to be, not my research, the research of other scholars as well, some of them academics, some of them from the Muslim world as well. It does seem to suggest the idea that the appearance of Hanafi qadis, it's a bit stronger after the demise of Imam Abu Yusuf. Now, Wallahu alam, if that's because Imam Abu Yusuf set the stone, like he set those kind of, he was laying the foundations for that. But in his lifetime, if we just check all the main qadis, so we can do that very easily by having a look at a book like Akhbarul Qudat of Al-Waqi', you can see the appearance of as many Hanafis as we would expect if Abu Yusuf is only choosing, like what Shah Waliullah says and what Ibn Hazm says, that he would only choose Hanafi Qudat. It's not as much as we would expect. But he does play a very pivotal role in the madhab in the sense that he does write a few books, but he's not, I would say, as important in kind of writing the books of the madhab as Imam Muhammad. And that's why I think we couldn't get into Imam Muhammad's life a little bit.
Muhammad ibn Hassan.
Imam Muhammad ibn al-Hassan al-Shaybani is, like you could say, He's our mudawwin. He's the first mudawwin of the madhab. Essentially, he writes the books of Zahir Riwayah. Zahir Riwayah, they're actually 5 books. So a lot of people think there's 6 books, but there's actually 5.
Okay.
As-Siyar al-Saghir is actually a part of al-Asl, which you've got, I can see in your library, mashallah.
Okay.
So this was a very common misconception. Ibn Abidin and many of the later Hanafis also
I thought it was
understood.
6, yeah.
Yeah, so al-Asir al-Saghir
Yeah.
is actually a part of al-Asl. So now this is now the mainstream dominant Hanafi position according to most Hanafis today as well. They'll tell you it's 5.
So you have al-Mabsut, which is
Al-Mabsut
al-Asl.
al-Asl. So you've got that there as well. Al-Mabsut al-Asl.
Al-Jami' al-Kabir.
Al-Jami' al-Kabir. It's better to go in order. So Al-Jami' al-Saghir was written after al-Asl.
Okay.
In this, by the way, just for those who are listening, he's writing down the opinions of Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Abu Yusuf, and his own opinion. And at the start of the book, he actually says, قَدْ ذَكَرْتُ لَكُمْ قَوْلَ أبي حنيفة وقول أبي يوسف وقولي, or to that effect. وَمَا لَمْ أَذْكُرْ فِيهِ اخْتِلَافًا فَهُوَ قَوْلُنَا جَمِيعًا. So he's mentioning now all of the opinions of Imam Abu Yusuf, Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Abu Yusuf, his 2 teachers, Abu Hanifa being the main teacher, obviously, and his own opinion.
And when I don't mention any khilaf, then it's all
قَوْلُنَا
about qawl.
جَمِيعًا.
Yeah.
And in the Hanafi madhab, mufta bihi will be, by default, it will be what is in Zahir Riwayah. The 5 books of Imam Muhammad will be the mufta bihi by default.
You know, Al-Shafi'i, he said, الناس في الفقه يالون على أبي حنيفة, right? In fiqh, people, they rely upon, they lean on Abu Hanifa, right? Would it be accurate to say that all of the, because from my limited research, very limited research so far, all of the Hanafi madhab, because Qadi Abu Yusuf, as important as he is, he didn't leave books behind for us. But Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Shaybani did. These 5 books that we've mentioned, that we are going to mention and discuss now, that we are discussing now.
Yeah.
Is it accurate to say Al-Hanafiya, يعني كلهم عيال على كتب Muhammad ibn Hassan? Is that accurate to say? All of the Hanafi books that followed, they all go back to these 5.
100% is accurate to say this.
Okay.
In fact, take a later book. So in our, might as well just get this out of the way because just in case we don't mention, and we did discuss this in the car, that this is important. The mutun mu'tabara in the Hanafi madhab. So remember, mutun are written after the madhab becomes a proper official madhab. And this was, I was, mashallah, listening to some of the other podcasts as well. And I think Imam Rashid also spoke about this, George Maqdisi and Melchett and their thesis. I think it's a very dominant thesis and it makes a lot of sense to me. We had essentially the regional schools of Kufa and Medina Munawwara, or Hijaz and Iraq, if you want to say. This developed more or less into the personal schools of Imam Malik and then Abu Hanifa. And later on, we had the guild and we had the legal official schools that began around about 300 Hijri. Now, Melchett says this was primarily at the hands for the Hanafis for Al-Karqi. For Shafi'is, it was Ibn Surayj. But I think for the Malikis, he says Qadi Ibn Ishaq, if I'm not mistaken, or to that effect. And for the Hanbalis, obviously Al-Khallal. So all of these later scholars that came, that this is when the madhab now becomes where we're writing mutun. Like, when would you write a mutun? When would you write a matan on something? It's when that thing has become so popular that it's like, it's too vast. Now we need to kind of make a
When
concise
there's istiqrar and the books are there, and now
when
we
the
need
books,
to...
now it's become a movement. It's like a movement. It's a full... So like you write a matan on something when something's become like a proper movement. That's the best way for me to... I can't think of any better way to say it. So by 300, before 300, you got semi-Hanafis, semi-Malikis, semi-Shafi'is, semi-Hanbalis. You got these ideas. You could say maybe for the Hanafi madhab, you could push it back to 250, when already there's a community forming who identify themselves as Hanafis. Before that, I would have to say everyone is a semi-Hanafi. They'll be agreeing with Abu Hanifa and so they'll have some of their own positions on certain issues as well. Now, after Al-Tahawi, Karkhi, especially even Al-Jassas and Abu Layth al-Samarqandi, this is all 300 Hijri now. This is when mutun are written. So in the mutun, early mutun, you've got Mukhtasar of Imam Al-Tahawi.
Yes.
You've got the Mukhtasar of Al-Karkhi. He is considered one of the founding fathers of the Hanafi madhab. Like I told you, Melchett attributes the madhab's development to him. That's the moment when now you can say 100% this person is a madhab, this person is a Hanafi, this person is a Maliki, this person is a... So the boundaries of this tradition of Hanafism or Malikism or Shafi'ism now develops. It's become a proper law system now. You know how you now get like English law or this law, that law? It's now become a proper law system. Like all the boundaries. You've got a law on a crime. You've got a law on, hudud. You've got law on, I don't know. There's so many different topics in Sharia, ibadat, muamalat, all of these. They're all interconnected. The system is complete now. Each You've got 4 different sets of systems of understanding the Quran and Sunnah, essentially. So these mutun that we have is Mukhtasar al-Tahawi, Mukhtasar al-Karhi. Then you've got a Mukhtasar called al-Mukhtasar al-Kafi lil-Hakim al-Shahid. Al-Kafi lil-Hakim al-Shahid. He summarizes al-Asl of Imam Muhammad, al-Mabsut.
Yeah.
Then the final one, which is a bit later, is Mukhtasar al-Quduri.
Yes.
He passed away 428.
This is what I hear all the Hanafis talking about, Mukhtasar al-Quduri.
Mukhtasar al-Quduri is part of, it falls into the earlier mutun, and then we've got the later mutun as well, which we're going to come to. Many Hanafis, or not many, some Hanafis, they will say stick to these earlier mutun. Both are good. The later mutun, let me enumerate them as well, just in case we don't miss out on them. The later mutun is going to be, Mukhtasar al-Quduri, I think we'll put it in there. But he passed away 428. 428 is kind of like the madhab more or less crystallize, and that's the term I'm going to use, by about 500 Hijri. What that means is now discussions on talfiq begins. Now discussions on actual, what are the boundaries of ijtihad?
Leaving your madhab and stuff.
All of that now begins at 500 Hijri.
Yeah.
That's why recently I was having a discussion with someone and they were saying that did Imam Shafi do talfiq on this issue then? You wouldn't attribute talfiq prior to 500 Hijri because there's no development of talfiq. The madhab was still developing.
Yeah.
But essentially, after 500 Hijri, or around about this time now, you've got different mutun that appear. You've got Imam al-Quduri's Mukhtasar. You've got a matan by the name of Bidayatul Mubtadi by Sahib al-Hidayah, Ali ibn Abi Bakr al-Marghinani. Then you've got a matan by the name of Kanz al-Daqa'iq.
Yes.
A matan, just before that, a matan called Al-Wiqaya.
Yes.
You've also got another matan called Majma' al-Bahrain, and a final matan that was written by an Ottoman scholar in late 900 Hijri called Multaq al-Abhur. But these are the later 6 mutun. The earlier mutun were the 4 that I said. Mukhtasar al-Tahawi, Mukhtasar of al-Karhi, Mukhtasar of al-Kafi of Hakim al-Shahid, and the final one is Mukhtasar al-Quduri.
So I've heard that the Mu'tamad, 4 Mukhtasarat, are Kanz, al-Wiqaya, al-Quduri, and there's a 4th one. Which one is the 4th one there?
Bidayatul Mubtadi?
I think so, Bidayatul Mubtadi.
So these were the.
So would you say these
are the later 6.
These are the
later 6. So we could make them into 10. Should we make them into 10 or 9 basically?
Okay.
So let's put 9 mutun in the madhab, which are very, very important. We'll start off from the earliest, we could say inshallah, which is Mukhtasar al-Tahawi. Then Mukhtasar of al-Kafi of Hakim al-Shahid. Or Mukhtasar al-Karhi would probably be a bit before that.
Yeah.
So al-Kafi of Hakim al-Shahid, Mukhtasar al-Karhi, Mukhtasar al-Quduri. Those are the early 4. Then we're going to come on a bit later to Bidayatul Mubtadi.
Okay.
Then you're going to have Al-Wiqaya.
Yes.
Then you're going to have Kanz al-Daqa'iq.
Okay.
Majma' al-Bahrain.
Okay.
And Multaq al-Abhur. These are going to be our 9 mutun that are very, very important in the Hanafi madhab.
Okay.
All of them essentially will be considering the Zahir al-Riwayah as the default. These mutun will... There's a big debate in the Hanafi madhab. Are they fully based upon Zahir al-Riwayah? Or are they just summarizing Zahir al-Riwayah?
Yeah.
Or do they deviate? They have a bit more than Zahir al-Riwayah as well. But they're primarily based upon Zahir al-Riwayah.
Fine. Okay.
And what is Zahir al-Riwayah? The 5 books of Imam Muhammad.
Muhammad ibn Hassan
Muharrir al-Madhab. They call him the Muharrir of the Madhab as well at times, or the Mudawwin of the Madhab. Al-Asl, Al-Jami al-Saghir, Al-Jami al-Kabir, Ziyadat. And there's also another book, Ziyadat Ziyadat, basically generally considered a part of it. And As-Siyar al-Kabir, which is the final book that he wrote before he passed away. So these are 5 books of Imam Muhammad.
So it may be beneficial now to mention, so what Imam Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Shaybani done for the Hanafis, these books, is essentially what Abu Bakr al-Khallal done for the Hanabila, and what maybe Ibn Abi Zayd al-Qayrawani done for the Malikis, right? So you're basically bringing... And Imam al-Shafi'i, what's unique about Imam al-Shafi'i is he wrote his own books in Furu'.
Yes.
He has his own authorship in Furu'.
That's really why the Shafi'i madhab, that's where I come back to my TARDIS problem again. With a Shafi'i, you've got to clear cut what's happening right from the start. He tells you in Ar-Risala, he tells you in Al-Um.
We have Nas from Shafi'i.
We have nusus, explicit nusus telling us his methodology. That's why he is the founding father of Usul Fiqh in the sense that he is. There's no denying that, although some have tried to deny it. He is definitely the founding father of Usul Fiqh. And
about Imam Abu Hanifa, actually, we don't have, and Imam Ahmad as well. Imam Malik, we could argue that he authored. The thing is, because Muwatta is, if you want to perceive it as a kitab of fiqh, there is this question: is it kitab of fiqh or hadith?
In the Hanafi book, and I would say you can't really call it a book of fiqh or a book of hadith entirely. It's somewhere in between.
Yeah. So there you go, right? So if you look at Imam Ahmad, he himself, Imam Ahmad, Imam Abu Hanifa didn't author their own works in furu'.
Imam Ahmad was very, obviously, as we know,
Right.
not so keen on writing down masail, etc.
Yeah.
He was, in fact, جرد الموطأ عن أقوال مالك. That's what Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali says in Sharh Ilal. He took all of everywhere قال مالك because we follow ahadith.
Yeah.
And that's where you see a change in methodology post Shafi'i to pre-Shafi'i. That's why Shafi'i is the most, if anyone wants to study the history of fiqh, you have to study a Shafi'i.
Yeah.
A Shafi'i, we are all Shafi'is in many ways. Even many Hanafis today are actually Shafi'i without realizing that you're actually a
Sheikh,
Shafi'i.
there's a joke, Sheikh Rashid, a good friend of mine who came for the Hanbali madhab. He mentioned that Subki, if he could throw in birds into Tabaqat al-Shafi'iyya, he would do that.
Yeah.
So Sheikh will put you in there as well, inshallah.
But just to push back a little bit on this, just so I can get back at the Shafi'i itself, it's all play, alhamdulillah, we're all one family, alhamdulillah.
Yeah.
Lakhnawi says in Al-Fawaid al-Bahiyya, in one of his books, he says, all of these are streams that connect with the fountain of Nubuwah. And I just found that comment so beautiful.
Yeah.
So when Imam al-Shafi'i is called from Yemen to Baghdad, he's accused of being in some rebellion or something, right? And this story is mentioned in our books. Again, it's mentioned in reliable books. Even al-Bayhaqi entertains it in Manaqib al-Shafi'i. Although, if I remember correctly, al-Bayhaqi doesn't pay too much attention. He tries to dismiss it a little bit. I forgot exactly what he says. But Imam Muhammad speaks to Harun al-Rashid.
Yeah.
Right, and he says to Harun al-Rashid that, this guy is not part of the rebellion. He looks like a talib al-ilm, leave him alone. And, Imam Shafi begins studying under Imam Muhammad. Now, some embellish this story that he was about to be executed and then he did it. Allahu alam, there seems to be something there that Imam Muhammad helped Imam al-Shafi'i. Yeah. So Ibn al-Imad, in his Shadarat al-Dhahab, he says, and this is something which if you want to take your pen and paper, you can just take a note of this. فَيَجِبُ عَلَى كُلِّ شَافِعِيٍّ إِلَى يَوْمِ الْقِيَامَةِ أَنْ يَعْرِفَ هَذَا لِمُحَمَّدِ بْنِ الْحَسَنِ وَيَدْعُ لَهُ بِالْمَغْفِرَةِ. So this is, it just shows our Imam, mashallah. Yeah. And then he had do you know what Ash-Shafi'i says about Imam Muhammad? He says, أَمَنُّ النَّاسِ عَلَيَّ فِي الْفِقْهِ محمد بن الحسن. ما رأيت سمينا أذكى من محمد بن الحسن. أعقل من محمد بن الحسن.
The person I owe the most to in fiqh is Muhammad bin
Hassan. Right. He says, ما ناظرت أحدا إلا تمعر في وجهه إلا محمد بن الحسن. I never debated anyone, Ash-Shafi'i says, except that he would go a bit red in the face because I would make him embarrassed, except Muhammad ibn Hassan. He was a real challenge to me. And so Ash-Shafi'i really develops under, there's a lot of, I think, debt. I'm not saying this in a kind of extremist way or in any way to kind of disparage the Shafi'is. There's a lot of debt Ash-Shafi'i owes to Imam Muhammad, even if you read Al-Umm carefully. He's learning a lot from Imam Muhammad, and a few positions he actually changes because of Imam Muhammad ibn al-Hassan's arguments against the Malikis, which is what Ash-Shafi'i comes as. When he comes to Iraq, he comes as a Maliki, and then he develops his ideas, and he develops a methodology different from the two traditions entirely. Yeah. And he says, no, I've got a different way of looking at the Quran and Sunnah.
Yeah. So Muhammad ibn Hassan, I think we discussed the books that are referred to as Kutub Zahir al-Riwaya. Yes. And we mentioned, alhamdulillah, I think it was very good that we got the books out of the way. We've mentioned the books of the madhab. These are the main mutun of the madhab. And now, Sheikh, should we have a discussion? I mean, there's a lot of the history. Should we continue through the history?
That's exactly what I was going to say. That
maybe we should go through it very, very quickly, smoothly, inshallah ta'ala.
Shall we start off by going? So I think one thing that would be very good for the viewers and listeners, inshallah, is if we just go century by century.
Yeah, let's do that.
And let's just go century by century.
Let's give a brief summary for each century. Sure. Let's do that.
So let's start off with basically. Should we start off with 150 to 200 is basically like you've got Kufa. And then a transition from Kufa to Baghdad. And now the community is growing in Baghdad, students of Imam Muhammad. And this includes, you've got many, many students that of Imam Muhammad. But another thing that I should probably just mention, the madhab moves from essentially from Iraq to also an area which we refer to as Mawara al-Nahr. Specifically, Khurasan first, Balkh. You've got a growing community of Hanafis. Yeah, Balkh is in Afghanistan. And then from there, straight through the Samanids especially, it moves to Transoxiana or Uzbekistan. That whole area now has a growing set of Hanafis. And that's why Abu Hafs al-Kabir, he moves, and Abu Hafs al-Kabir I think passed away, 2 something. He moves from Transoxiana, Uzbekistan, basically that Bukharan area. He's a ustad of teacher of Imam al-Bukhari. He moves from there to Iraq, Baghdad, to study under Imam Muhammad and comes back. And there's a reason behind that, but it was a lot to do with Imam Abu Hanifa's position on Iman. Right? It was a bit, the irja played a role there. But that's a separate topic, inshallah, another day for another day. So we've got now Hanafis developing both on the western side and eastern side. Then we come to 200 to 300. Now you've got the Hanafi community is forming essentially. And this is now the students of Imam Abu Yusuf, Imam Muhammad, and Imam Zufar. And they're doing 5 things. They're preserving the writings of the A'imah. Number 2, they're transmitting the writings of the A'imah. Number 3, they're defending the positions of the A'imah. Number 4, they begin identifying basic principles underlying the rulings of the A'imah. And number 5, they begin writing commentaries on the writings of the A'imah. During this time, essentially 200 to 300, there's a lot happening in terms of politics as well. Just to give you a very brief example, essentially, the Abbasids are more or less, they're weakening. You've got the Tulunids that pop up around about 250, etc. in Egypt. Then they disappear. But after that, Egypt is never the same. So Egypt never really has many Hanafi Qudat after the likes of Bakr ibn Qutayba, Abu Khazim, and some of these Hanafi. Abu Khazim, wasn't in Egypt, if I'm not mistaken. Or did he travel? I'm forgetting. But in any case, Hanafi Qudat after Al-Tahawi. Tahawi, you could say, was like the main Hanafi in Egypt. After him, the Fatimids come in. And it's only, I think, 50 years after Tahawi passed away in 321 that the Fatimids take over Egypt. And after that, the Fatimids obviously nemesis of Abbasids. Abbasids are sponsoring the Hanafis. The Fatimids are their main nemesis. And so therefore, they never had a very favorable position towards the Hanafis. I don't think, Allahu Alam, very scarce qadi you'll see in the Fatimids, amongst the Fatimids, even amongst the Muslims there, the Sunnis there, sorry. So between now, if you look at 300 to 400, so 200 to 300 on the eastern side, just by the way, Samanids, a lot of stuff happens. I mean, we don't have time to go into the whole history. Samanids then break up into the Ghaznavids and the Karakhanids. The Samanids were very pro-Hanafi. Essentially, during the early periods of Hanafis, you could say there were quite a few Mu'tazila. The Mihna, we forgot to discuss it, but we don't have enough time to get into the whole Mihna, but it was carried out by Mu'tazili Hanafis. Mu'tazili in creed, but in fiqh they were Hanafis. And you can see why, because Abu Hanifa's fiqh was generally a bit more ara'ayta, ra'i, etc. It does encourage deviance as well to pop in as well, 100%, because it allows you to develop your own ideas to things. During 300 to 400, this is when the Hanafi madhab becomes an official madhab, you could say. And now, you could say, through the efforts of Imam Abu Yusuf, the books of Imam Muhammad, the students, the Hanafi madhab is essentially being sponsored left, right and center. Abbasids in the western side, eastern side, you've got more or less the Karakhanids, Ghaznavids. I told you the story about Ghaznavi, that author, Ad-Din, even he was afraid that even a comment against Abu Hanifa has been made in his gathering. Then after that, a lot of things to say, but we'll just move on with a bit of speed. Obviously, Abbasids also come under control of the Buyids. In the Buyid times, between 300 to 400, essentially now, Abu al-Hasan al-Karqi, there's a reinvigoration of the Mu'tazila a little bit. So Al-Jassas, Al-Karqi do have some inclinations towards I'tizal, but it's not like the early Mu'tazila. I think that's very interesting and very important to clarify. And then you get the two schools. The Iraqian school is Abu al-Hasan al-Karqi, starts with probably Isa ibn Aban, these early Hanafi students of Imam Muhammad, a slight inclination in certain views towards the Mu'tazila. Iraqi school is, Al-Karqi is very important in the Iraqi school. Jassas, his student, passed away 370. After 400 to 500, you have two A'imma in Uzbekistan area, Transoxiana, Mawra al-Nahr, whatever you want to call it, called Shamsul A'imma al-Halwani and Shamsul A'imma al-Sarakhsi. They lead the Hanafi madhab to become like, after them, every important Hanafi was basically from that area. Shamsul A'imma al-Halwani and Sarakhsi, and they are living in the time of the Karakhanids, and after the Karakhanids, you've got basically all of these different empires that pop up. The Ghurids take over the Ghaznavid area, and the whole Karakhanid area is overtaken by this Western Leo dynasty, and all of these things happen. It's all discussed in the Hanafi book in detail. And in any case, we'll move forward to the Mongols. When the Mongols come, obviously Mongol hordes are coming. The Khwarezmian dynasty is wiped out immediately. Yeah. They come. The one dynasty that does survive, and they end up in India, and the Mongols tried as much as they could. There's one area they couldn't conquer, which was Egypt, but people forget the other area, India. They couldn't conquer India. They tried a number of times. So the Delhi Sultanate was established in India,
Mm-hmm.
and they were also, because of that tradition of Shams al-Aim al-Halwani al-Sarakhsi and that whole Hanafi tradition that was developing in Uzbekistan. I call it Uzbekistan, obviously, it wasn't called that at that time. The Delhi Sultanate, which is from this area, is where now you're going to get, at one point, the Mughals will come here.
Yeah.
And they will be like the inheritors of this, even though Babur comes from obviously he comes from the leftover of Tamerlane and all of that.
Yeah.
But he invades the Delhi Sultanate, and the Hanafi madhab now is quite strong. Even pre-Babur, the Delhi Sultanate plays a very important role in establishing the Hanafi madhab in India. On the other side now, as the Mongols are moving this way, Hanafis are all moving that way. And before them, the Seljuks had already started moving towards, when they take over the Buyids, they get rid of the Buyids late, mid 450 Hijri, approximately that area, that time. Remember, they're coming from the east. They already prefer Hanafis. Eastern side is all Hanafi, mashallah. They have a good Khurasan, the Iran area, a bit everything kind of going on. When they come and they take over the whole Iraqian area of the Buyids, the Abbasid Khalifa, etc., is now very happy as well, because obviously the Buyids, Shi'i, these lot are, of course, Sunni. The Seljuks preferred the Hanafis, not just any Hanafi, Hanafis that came from that side. So the Shams al-Aim al-Halwani and Shams al-Aim al-Sarakhsi tradition is very strong, even as the Seljuks are moving towards the western side of the world. And then as the Mongols come, they wipe out all of this. So the Hanafis are moving more and more towards the west. And so it takes even, like, for example, the Ayyubids, who are basically there in Egypt and all of these areas, they actually helped the Hanafis a lot. They created madaris for the Hanafis, etc. When the Mongols invade all of these areas, obviously they do not succeed in conquering Egypt. And obviously the Battle of Ain Jalut takes place.
Yeah.
Essentially, at that point, you could say that there was a standstill and the Mongols are more or less repelled. Hanafism develops in Egypt over time now. Just to speed things up, you've got the Ottomans develop over time as well.
Yeah.
Ottomans preferred the Hanafis as well. And
Then
essentially,
after the Ottomans, it's,
everything's just Hanafi.
and then
nowadays.
Alamgir within his reign, Al-Fatawa al-Alamgiriya, Al-Fatawa al-Hindiya, right? Very, very popular. One of the biggest compendiums of Hanafi Fatawa, right? In India. And then the Ottomans, after the Ottomans, I think it's very, very clear. And then we come to our modern day. And now you have different kind of schools, different types of Hanafis who come from Turkey, Hanafis who come from the Indian subcontinent, Shami Hanafis, for example,
100%.
Sheikh Muhammad Awama and Sheikh Abdul Fattah Abu Ghadda and the likes, etc. So I think that was a summarized history of the madhab, mashallah, tabarakallah. When we come to usul, Sheikh, discussing usul of the madhab, there's a couple of points we can mention regarding the usul of the madhab. Maybe I should ask you, what are a couple of usul that we can discuss of the Hanafi madhab?
So I think
that are unique, you know?
So I think the key three usul that we should maintain in our minds for the Hanafi madhab is the three pillars of the Hanafi madhab.
Okay.
And the three pillars that I would say that you need to kind of remember for the Hanafi madhab, the three foundational pillars. Number one, pillar one is communal practice. So they look at tawaruth and ta'amul of Ahlul Kufa quite a bit. That's very, very, very strong within the Hanafi madhab. The pillar two is the idea of qawaid. The Hanafis consider qawaid amma, ma'ani fiqhiyya, aqisa amma, whatever you want to call them, they consider them to be qat'i. This is the idea that they've done istiqra of the nusus of sharia, and they've come up with these qawaid which they consider them to be qat'i, like this is something that's a part of sharia law, you can't change this.
And these qawaid, do they have istithna'at, like exceptions?
100%. So they will refer to these istithna'at as istihsan.
Okay.
So anytime we need to move away because there's another qa'idah kicking in, or because of tawaruth, because of communal practice, they will practice upon communal practice and they will basically refer to that as istihsan.
So these qawaid, basically, that means that what is the room for scholarship in the Hanafi madhab? Meaning, if you have these qawaid that are set from because qawaid can only be, if it's through istiqra and stuff like that, that can only be set by ulama, right? Of the highest caliber from the Hanafi background. So they look at the nusus shar'iyya and then they come to specific qawaid. What happens with nawazil? Is that the job of the modern day alim, for example, to do tatbiq of these qawaid on nawazil? Is that what it is?
100%. So I forgot the third principle. So the third principle is the epistemological superiority of the Quran over the Sunnah. So that is something they do consider.
Okay.
So they do consider the Quran to be more. So they will, for example, they will be a bit reluctant to do takhsis of the Quran.
By Sunnah.
واحد. That is something that's there in the Hanafi Madhab. That's more about thubut and the idea that we want to make sure our amal is upon the highest form of establishment from Sharia.
And this is obviously, this is an issue in usul where
100%.
the Shafi'is will disagree
100%.
and others will disagree.
Yeah, I mean, a Shafi'i dedicates a whole decent portion of his al-Um, or at least a certain section of his al-Um to deal with this issue.
Yeah.
So in terms of how do you engage in the Hanafi Madhab, it's about learning these qawaid. Learning these qawaid. So if I were to give you, for example, simple qawaid would be things like al-fitru mimma dakhal wa laysa mimma kharaj.
Al-fitru?
Al-fitru mimma dakhal wa laysa mimma kharaj.
Okay.
Whatever breaks your fast will be things that go into your body, nothing that comes out of your body.
Interesting. Okay.
So now every hadith when you have the issue of cupping, Hanafis will just naturally not want to, they will do ta'wil of it. They will try to think, okay, maybe this happened, maybe Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi sometimes they might even have an issue with the sanad, even though they don't look at sanad as much as the muhaddithun. They will try to find problems with the sanad simply because they find that asl to be qat'i. Why? Because they want to maintain consistency in Sharia as much as possible.
Interesting.
Unless there's amal upon cupping. If there was amal upon cupping in Kufa, then they would move away from it. And they would move away from al-fitru mimma dakhal wa laysa mimma kharaj. Or they'll make an istithna there.
Okay.
So also another one. The nawaqidul wudu is khurujun najasa. Khurujun najasa min mawda'in najasa ila mawda'in yalhaquhu hukm at-tathhir. That's a full qa'idah, but khurujun najasa is the number one reason as to why your wudu breaks. So everything else, so blood, you can see, even anything that comes out of the body, basically.
Interesting.
So now when we look at things like, if you look at the Hanafis, they say if you laugh out loud in salah, your wudu breaks. That's qahqah. That's because they found ta'amul and tawaruth upon this hadith. Even though the hadith is weak, sanad and it's weak.
Yeah.
So you can see the Hanafi approach isn't just based upon asanid. It's based upon tawaruth, ta'amul, qawa'id. That's quite strong. They still look at a hadith as well, but they want to have a consistent look at Sharia. They want to make sure Sharia is as much following these qawa'id as much as possible. Another one is, for example, the asl is that in every, Imam Muhammad mentions this in Al-Hujjah, which is his book that he wrote against not against Imam Malik, but as a rejoinder to Imam Malik. He says that the asl is that in every rak'ah there should be one ruku. Now you think that's an obvious one, right? Where does it kick in? Salatul Kusuf.
Kusuf, yeah, I was going to say.
When Al-Jassas comes to this chapter in Sharh Mukhtasar al-Tahawi, which is Sharh on Mukhtasar al-Tahawi, one of the mutun.
Yeah.
He says, he goes through all the hadith, and he says, وَالْأَخْبَارُ التي I forgot the exact wording, شاهد بها الأصول, to that effect. And usul he's referring to, the qawaid he's referring to, is this qaida.
Okay.
That those ahadith are in line with this qaida that in every rak'ah there should be one ruku. Those are the ones that we'll go with.
Okay.
So you can see there's an element of wanting consistency in the law.
Yeah.
The law must be also sensible, because this is going to be applied across the whole country now, and this is going to be, all the qudat will be following this. So we need a consistent application of the entire Sharia. I'll give you a few more qawaid. For example, some of these obviously, some of them are not directly from the Aimah, they extracted, but you can see that the Aimah consider them to be qat'i. Also, by the way, this al-fitru mimma dakhal wa laysa mimma kharaj, if you look at in Sahih Ibn Khuzaymah, Ibn Khuzaymah has a full refutation on this. What is this? Where do you guys get this from? He's not happy with it. So you can see the difference in methodology. Like Ibn Khuzaymah doesn't seem to appreciate that you've extracted this from many nusus. He doesn't see it that way. So that can happen as well. Shafi'i essentially felt that the istiqra of the Hanafis was naqis. It was not sufficient. You guys have not checked everything carefully, and that's fine. Absolutely, everyone can have their own approach. And the qaida I can just give you maybe al-rubu'u yahki hikayat al-kamal.
Okay. So
Hanafis found this in many nusus of Sharia, that a quarter seems to be equivalent to the whole. So many times they will, for when it comes to the mas'af, ala ra's, etc., they will say quarter of the head, or at least. So you can see these are very important. Kafaratu sawm tudra bishubuhat. So the 60 days of fasting, they connect it with hudud. Literally, Jassas in his Sharh Mukhtasar al-Tahawi, so many times he says the kafara of fasting, when you break your fast on purpose, and you have to fast 60 fasts, it's exactly like hudud, capital punishments, where any shubuhat will drop the kafara. So you can see masail are interconnected. This is what I mean by that system of the madhahib, the consistent system. كل من صار أهلا للزوم ولم يكن كذلك في أول اليوم يجب عليه الإمساك. This is related to fasting. In مسائل of إحرام كل طواف بعده سعي ففيه رمل والإطباء. Every tawaf after which there is a sa'i, in it there will be a ramal and ittiba. If there is no sa'i after that tawaf, no ramal and no ittiba in that tawaf. You can see it's like maintaining consistency.
So this sand, okay.
I'll give you a good example of this. In Sahih ibn Hibban, for example, we have the very famous qawl of Ishaq ibn Rahwa as well when it comes to sajdatul sahw.
Okay.
If there's ziyada, if there's naqs, do it before, after. I remember when we went through that hadith with Mufti Shabir Sahib in Sahih Ibn Hibban adopts, I think, a similar position to Ishaq ibn Rahwa. He spends a full paragraph explaining what you should be doing. When we read it in class, Mufti Shabir Sahib just laughed and he said, Har ek ko is tarah mujtahid banana mushkil padega. Like, to explain this mas'ala will be so difficult to people. And that's essentially how Hanafis viewed things. Don't make Sharia so hard that it's not even sensible. It doesn't make sense to follow. Now you might say, well, wife Nabi Sallallahu, they will do ta'weel. They will try to make one qa'idah of what Nabi Sallallahu was trying to do, and they will do ta'weel of the ones that contradict this one qa'idah. So Hanafis will just say the sajda to sahwa takes place after, whether there's ziyada. It's easy to follow. It's completely, and then all of the other ahadith, we will try to give answers to them. We will get. Now, obviously, I understand if someone's properly loyal to the asanid-based system, 100%, we are loyal to the asanid-based system. We've got to realize Abu Hanifa has got a vantage point we don't have, which is amal. He's looking at Kufa. He's looking at also, they have a brain of looking at epistemological certainty of the Quran and the Quran over the Sunnah as well. And another final point is that they would look at things like, this is a whole research that could be done over how much of fiqh has the Hanafi madhab adopted, because it's actually more easy to follow as well. As in, when I say easy, it's just more systemized. Like, imagine if in your primer to fiqh or ta'lim al-haq or whatever you have, that is going to give you, like when you give it to kids and you told them sajdatul sahwa, if there's ziyada after, if there's this, the kid might be just so confused, like, how do I follow this? So some of Hanafi madhab is based upon that idea as well. What creates ease? I'll give you a good example. What's the amount that you should read in every salah? Fajr, how much? And Dhuhr, how much? You'll find different mukhtalif riwayat on all of this. The Hanafi madhab therefore just came and said, look, this is going to be hard. Sometimes you have Nabi Sallallahu reading just Surah Al-Ikhlas and this. Sometimes you have him reading so much for Maghrib. So they came up with a pattern. The general pattern that Nabi Sallallahu followed was Maghrib short, Fajr long. Okay, then what do you do? Because Hanafi madhab is based quite a bit upon looking at the people, urf, communal practice. So then the author of Al-Hidayah comes and he actually even says, you look at the community. If they can handle more, then you read from here to here. If they can't handle this much, then you read from here to here. If they're even lower, if they are kusala, then you read from here to here. So you can see it's like, it's the madhab is like, it's almost like it's a functioning system that keeps going until, as long as society is there, the madhab will be there. So that's how you study the madhab.
I really like the way you put some of the qawaid down for us, some of the usul, so we can get a taste of that flavor of that. Jazakumullah khair, and you've explained it very, very nicely. We spoke about the kutub of the madhab, right? I always like to do manhajiyya last in terms of study, and obviously there are many places for Hanafis if they want to study the madhab, etc. So we'll do that last. The second last thing, which is what I want to discuss with you now, there's a couple of furu', let's say. There are a couple of masail that the Hanafi madhab has, outside of Hanafi circles, maybe I should say it like that, is quite stereotypically known for, right? So for example, one of those is fi bab al-nikah, for example, right? The woman can get married without her wali. What's your opinion on this? What's your understanding of this?
So, like
is that true?
Like I said, I think we discussed this a bit earlier. How should we portray this? So because I've not fully looked into this mas'ala. I have looked at it in the past. I just need to look at it again. I don't want to comment too much, just in case someone is like. So, but I'll just make a basic comment. In Al-Asl, Imam Muhammad does mention this. They also do mention the idea that if kafa'a is not there, so if the woman is of a high stature and there's different things that we consider for kafa'a, deen, mal, all of this nasab, all of these things that we look at in the Hanafi madhab. If the kafa'a is not there, then in that scenario, the wali has the haqqul i'tirad. The haqqul i'tiraf.
Kafa'a is suitability.
Suitability. If the suitability is not there, the wali has haqqul i'tiraf.
Mhm.
This was the originally what was mentioned in our books. Later scholars came and said that this is going to open the doors to fitna and fasad. And this is what I mean by the madhab. The madhab develops over time. It's only Hanafi in that it's named after Abu Hanifa.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's a tradition that develops
Yeah.
over time and people
Yeah.
build on it. It's a building block. Everyone adds something that the previous generation did not add. And the later Hanafis did practice upon a riwayah of Al-Hasan ibn Ziyad, if I recall correctly, which is that the nikah just will not take place if the kafa'a is not there. If kafa'a is there and everything's fine and all the rulings of Sharia are being followed, we technically will allow that nikah to take place. Even if, like for example, if the wali is not aware of it, as long as kafa'a is there. And usually in those scenarios, the wali will probably be fine anyway with it, because in that scenario, there's kafa'a. There's kafa'a, so why would the wali have an issue? But if, for example, kafa'a is not there, they come from totally different cultures and the woman's from a very high stature, man is from a bit of a lower stature, then in that scenario, if the wali is not happy, the nikah just will not take place. So there, that la nikah illa bi waliyin will essentially be applied. And the nikah will be, if I'm not mistaken, he says batil. That's what Al-Haskafi and Ibn Abidin al-Shami, all of them they go with that opinion, that it is batil.
So do you think this is a view? What's your opinion on non-Hanafis following this view with a very simplistic idea that, the Hanafis allow it?
So this is tatabu' rukhas, and tatabu' rukhas is just like, this is ittiba'u shahawat, is just, the doors are just like literally right next to tatabu' rukhas. Is tatabu' rukhas, I would say the ijma' is there on tatabu' rukhas. Ibn Hazm has the naqal of the ijma', Ibn Abd al-Bar has the naqal of the ijma'. To just jump from one madhab to another looking for leeways, only 3 scholars to the best of my knowledge, or 4 maybe, some of them following the ones who came before them. Izzuddin ibn Abd salam has 2 fatwa. Ibn al-Humam famously said yes. To be honest with you, Ibn al-Humam himself, he was a Sufi. He was like, he you know how Sufis are, in the sense they like to go through all the awrad, and so he was already quite, his nafs was very, he didn't tazkiyah of himself, and for his tatabu' rukhas, I think would have been a very different tatabu' rukhas than the one people think he's allowing. Izzuddin ibn Abd salam, he has 2 fatwa. One of his, in what's recorded from him, I think in Al-Mi'yar, is that he allowed it. But then in his fatwa, he doesn't allow it. He's not happy with it. As-Samhudi in his Al-Iqd al-Farid, he's fine with it. These are 3, Al-Hamawi maybe.
There is that general...
It's literally 4 or 5 scholars. You can count them on your fingers. Some have tried to make it look like, there's a book called Pragmatism in Islamic Law by Ibrahim Fakri. In this book, I don't know, I feel like he's not understood the difference between tatabbu'u rukhas and akhdhu rukhsa. Akhdhu rukhsa is fine.
Yeah.
Tatabbu'u rukhas is not okay.
Yeah.
There is an ijma' upon this, and I think this ijma' can't be negated, and it is very strong. And I think if a person is doing tatabbu'u rukhas, you would really want to ask him, how are you not doing ittiba'ul hawa? Like where are you drawing that line between tatabbu'u rukhas and ittiba'ul hawa?
Yeah.
I think
this is another thing that people need to understand as well, that the responsibility of the layperson, some people, they have the understanding that the layperson has absolutely zero responsibility. When in reality, the layperson also has a responsibility.
Absolutely.
Meaning, what do I mean by this responsibility? If you know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for example, you as a layman even, you know that, this view, for example, I'm just following this view because, I want to, when in reality, I'm actually more inclined that the truth is with this view. The truth is with this view, but I'm going to follow this just because such and such scholar said this.
This is a very famous usuli discussion. I mean, Imam al-Ghazali discussed it. Ibn Salah, at the end of Adab al-Mufti wal-Mustafti, if you get 2 different fatwas from Muftis, what should he mentions like 5 different opinions. I think the best discussion I found on this topic, some people might not find it too harsh, whatever, is a Chati in al-Muwafaqat. He says, لا بد له أيضا, he also needs to have a ضرب من الاجتهاد as well.
This is what I'm referring to.
Although
the ijtihad of the ammi.
Although Ibn al-Humam and al-Ghazali and others as well, they said that, I think Ibn al-Humam specifically, he said his ijtihad is not even counted. What ijtihad capability does he have? I think this is mukhalif lil waqi. Many times, even al-Ghazali says this. Al-Ghazali was famously of this opinion that you must follow the awra and, the afdal, etc. But this is a famous اختلاف تقليد المفضول. Can you do تقليد? It's allowed. I mean, these debates, these discussions, usuli discussions, alhamdulillah, I've read them in Al-Iqd al-Farid, I've read them in Al-Bahr al-Muhit of Al-Zarkashi. In Al-Muwafaqat of Al-Shatibi, we read that whole volume in our class. Al-Shatibi has the best discussion. When a Mustafti is going to a Mufti, he's essentially saying to him, أخرجني عن هواي ودلني على اتباع الحق. Take me away from my desires and show me the right of Sharia.
That's it, yeah.
And if the Mufti now tells him, go back to your desires, you've got a choice, whichever one you want to choose. That's basically, I don't think that's the right way of doing things. You're telling him to go back to his desires.
This is
so the
thing,
whole point of Sharia, this is something I've quoted in the book, فائدة وضع الشريعة إخراج النفس أو إخراج الرجل عن اتباع هواه, or to that effect.
It's about, this is what people need to understand. When you're asking someone for an Islamic ruling, you're asking them for what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger have recommended for this thing. What is the Islamic Sharia? What is Allah's ruling on this thing?
100%.
So when you're asking that question, your desires shouldn't be in the mix.
Yes.
It should be a thing where I'm asking this to actually gain the truth.
Absolutely.
And if you look at these masail in that way, then you know, even Hanafi, I'm sure Hanafi ulama would
100%.
tell you.
No, it's not allowed. Unless there's a haja. There's a difference when a bunch of ulama get together, they do mashwara, and they realize, okay, there's a haja in this community, we need to now, and they do something which Sherman Jackson, in one of his books, he calls it legal scaffolding.
Yeah.
You basically build upon the madhab and you come up with an opinion which isn't fully from the madhab, but it solves the problem. That's okay. Because it's not ittiba' al-hawa, it's to deal with it nazila.
Sheikh, you know, there was a couple, they were not married, they came from up north to a student of knowledge that I'm aware of here in London to do their nikah for them. And when he went to the restaurant, they were just sitting there by themselves, and he said, okay, where's your dad? So the woman said, no, we want to, do it without. So he said, I'm not doing this nikah for you.
Good on
they
him,
said, Sheikh, we're going to commit zina then, it's going to be on you. He said, do what you want. I'm not involved in your, I'm not in your nonsense, right? But this is the point, and the thing is, Sheikh, this type of thing, what's actually happening for al-waqi, what people are taking. Imagine there's a father walking around, father and mother, and he doesn't know that his daughter is married.
Yeah.
What kind of ajib thing is that, right?
It's to be honest with you, it's mukhalafa of the maqasid al-sharia. To come back to maqasid as well. Maqasid al-sharia, people use that to open doors, but really maqasid al-sharia closes a lot of doors as well, and that's very important. Hifdh al-nasab, hifdh I would say, even though it's not one of the 5 maqasid, but hifdh of like the well-being of the community and well-being of the family. That's part of it. Hifdh al-ard, you could say, it falls within that. Yeah. Although hifdh al-ard is not one of the 5, but who said it needs to be 5? I've seen our fuqaha use the idea of protection of honor. Like, for example, just the other day in Al-Hidayah, we came across an example. When you're in the masjid, adhan has gone off, you cannot leave. If you've read already Asr Salah or Isha Salah, you must now rejoin the new Jama'ah and read it as nafal. لأنه يتهم بمخالفة الجماعة. If he leaves, people will accuse him of doing mukhalafa of the Jama'ah. So that's literally hifdh al-ard, protection of honor. So this is very important. If you open these doors, like, getting married without the permission of your wali, this is hifdh al-ard, like, people's honor will be just trampled over. My daughter ran away with so we can't be allowing this in the name of Sharia. I don't think it's wise at all.
Jazakumullah khairan, Sheikh. And the last question I have for you, inshallah ta'ala, we can end the podcast with this, is what is a good manhajiyya that a Hanafi student should go through? And obviously, I think with the Hanafis, this question is a bit different, right? Because usually in some of the other madahib, for example, there's not really madaris, Shafi'i madaris. We can go in London or in Blackburn or in Birmingham to go and study in a madrasa, and you can go through the whole manhajiyya. So with the Hanafis, I think this question is a bit more weird, because if you're a Hanafi talib ilm, you'll just probably go to one of these madaris. But just for the sake of us learning, what is the usual, quick manhajiyya that a student goes through? So what's the first book, second book, third book, like that?
Sure. So obviously you wouldn't start off with the 5 Dhahir Riwayah, because you start off with the mutun. Mutun is there for a reason. It tells you the khulas of the madhab.
Yeah.
So mutun could be something like you could study Mukhtasar al-Quduri, which is what most madahib start off. Most madaris start off with Mukhtasar al-Quduri at some point.
Okay.
Mukhtasar al-Quduri, from there you would take it on to the commentary, I would say. It's more or less لأنه كالشرح على القدوري. Okay. There's a sharh on Quduri. There's a book written by Sahih al-Hidayah called Bidayatul Mubtadi.
Yeah.
In there, he combined Quduri and Al-Jami al-Saghir, one of the 5 books of Imam Muhammad.
Okay.
Then he wrote a sharh on that
Is that
called
Radd al-Mukhtar?
Al-Hidayah. Al-Hidayah.
Al-Hidayah, yeah.
So Al-Hidayah
Yeah.
is more or less like a sharh of Quduri.
Yeah.
So Quduri, then move on to Al-Hidayah.
Yeah.
One of the reasons we study Al-Hidayah, one of my teachers, he said to me, one of the reasons he said to our whole class is, Hidayah is a hard kitab. You learn how to read Al-Hidayah, it will allow you to read any kitab, inshallah.
Yeah.
Even books, difficult books like Ibn Hajar al-Makki's Tuhfat al-Muhtaj, very, very difficult kitab to read, I find anyway. It will allow you to read it if you've read Hidayah properly. Another one is that it teaches you the inner workings of the madhab. It teaches you these 3 principles I told you about communal practice, qawa'id, and epistemological superiority of the Quran. After Al-Hidayah, now you can start moving into the fatawa genre a little bit if you wish. After Al-Hidayah, honestly, you can do anything you want. I would recommend one book which I think is not given enough attention, which is Sharh Mukhtasar al-Tahawi of Al-Jassas, Abu Bakr al-Jassas al-Razi. I think that book is very much neglected. If I could, I would get students who are studying Al-Hidayah to read that book along with Al-Hidayah. You will really enjoy it. And then finally, the one book, if you want to go into fatawa, the one scholar, we refer to him as the final muharrir of the madhab, is Ibn Abidin al-Shami. He wrote a book called Radd al-Muhtar, sometimes referred to as Shami. In there, no fatwa in the madhab will be given at least without consulting this book. Whether you agree with it or not, you must look at Radd
And that is what they famously refer to as Hashiyat ibn Abidin.
Hashiyat ibn Abidin. Hashiyat ibn Abidin, subhanAllah, I discuss it in the book as well. This is, you must read it, at least whether you agree with whether he's transmitted the madhab properly or not.
Yeah.
But his abilities to have read everything that came before him on a mas'ala is just incredible. So that's what I would say. And every time you're reading the books of fiqh, picking up on these nuggets of gold. لأن, every time the muallif says لأن هذا, you've got to highlight it. Like this is really important. لأن الفطرة مما دخل وليس مما خرج. Whoa, that's it. This whole mas'ala is revolving
That's
around
like
this
principle.
key legal idea. Right? And can you see, like al-fitr mimma, that's not a hadith, but it's understood. So that's why we say these 4 madhahib are the understanding of the Quran and Sunnah in a systemized manner. And that's the way to read the madhab. Make sure you understand the qawaid.
It's like, you know, it's very beneficial when you're studying fiqh. Like one of the qawaid that I just remember that the Shafi'is have, for example, you know, I don't know what the Hanafi view is on this, but for example, if I start a fast that is, let's say I'm making qada for Ramadan and I start it, or let's say I start a sunnah fast, for example, okay, do I have to continue it, right? So the Shafi'is have a qaida. They say الشروع لا يغير المشروع. So if you start in something, الشروع, it doesn't change the hukm of the fi'l you're doing.
MashaAllah. So you can still...
It doesn't change the original hukm of al-mashru', right?
Yeah. So does that mean you can now leave the fast at any point?
Yeah.
So we can't.
Yeah.
That's interesting. That's
Yeah.
for us, الشروع نظر. الشروع نظر. As soon as you've started, this is like you've promised Allah. So you can see this is again connected to the qaida of وَلَا تُبْطِلُوا أَعْمَالَكُم.
Yeah.
Don't, and it's almost like from a maslaha maqasidi perspective as well, it's the idea of a wa'd you've made to Allah Ta'ala. أوفوا بالعهد, or you know, like fulfill your promises to Allah. من ذا الذي يقرض الله, you've given a qard to Allah now. Can't take it back now. You've given this loan to Allah, fulfill the loan, and you know, like give it. So you can see the ideas of that. Again, the Hanafis have not said this under this chapter, what I'm saying there. But this is very important to moralize some of these qawaid and moralize some of these, because today with the Orientalists and with the non-Muslims as well, they find Sharia very backward. And this, I'm speaking now beyond the madhahib, I'm speaking more from a broad perspective of Islam. We need to show how a lot of our Sharia is based upon better ethics and morals than even, they don't even have any ethics and morals, a lot of their laws anyway. You can see clearly, of course, astaghfirullah, the genocide. But a lot of our laws were based upon these ethics, morals, and a lot of these ethics and morals were to do with the hereafter as well. That's very important. One of the biggest problems with the Maslaha movement is they only look at this dunya, whereas it's also to do with akhirah, more to do with akhirah.
Yeah, subhanallah. Sheikh Muadh, may Allah bless you. Jazakumullah khairan. Thank you so much, Sheikh Muadh, for the brothers. You know, actually, we need to give some shout outs, and we need to firstly thank Sheikh Muadh for coming. all the way from Blackburn, subhanAllah. The Sheikh has essentially taken his day out for this because you left in the morning, Sheikh, and now it's like 6 p.m. And we're gonna eat afterwards as well, inshallah. You have to eat with us. When is the latest train, Sheikh? I'm asking
so
you.
the latest train, I'm not sure exactly. So my train was meant to be at 6 something.
That's not gonna happen.
That's not happening. But I think there is one at, I think about 7:30 or something like that.
Is that the latest one?
That might not be the latest one.
Okay, because
But I think it would be good to take that one just so I can maybe head back. But let's see, inshallah.
Inshallah,
Whatever's easier
inshallah
for you as
ta'ala.
well, inshallah.
Jazakumullah khairan. The Sheikh's taking his day out for coming. Also, I would like to thank a friend of mine, Sheikh Muhammad Nadat, who I initially contacted for this, and also Sheikh Zishan.
Zishan, yes.
Sheikh Zishan, who's from Imam Zakaria
Yes.
Academy,
Yes.
who essentially facilitated this for us.
100%.
You know, and Sheikh, honestly, I'm very, very happy that you agreed to do this.
Yeah.
And inshallah, you know what, we can get you on for some more stuff.
Inshallah.
It'd be
more
very,
than
very
happy to.
nice to discuss your
Inshallah,
book
more
on
than happy to.
hadith, your introduction to hadith. We can maybe discuss some other topics as
Absolutely.
well. Do some podcasts on specific issues, inshallah. Maybe one day if I want to do biographies of the Imams, we can do a whole one on Imam Abu Hanifa, maybe.
Inshallah.
Inshallah
Absolutely.
ta'ala.
Sheikh Zishan also has a reading institute, which I think definitely we can give that a shout out as well. Really important. That's a really nice initiative where you know he'll guide you on how to read books, and their podcast series that they do on IZA is also fantastic, mashallah.
Barakallah fikum, Sheikh. Jazakumullah khairan. And brothers and sisters, do subscribe if you haven't already, inshallah ta'ala. Jazakumullah khairan for listening. And once again, we have to also mention, check out Sheikh Muadh's channel. I've actually benefited from some of his videos. I've watched some of them. He reviews books and doesn't limit them to Arabic books. So if you just read English, for example, you could check out some of those reviews and get some good recommendations. I'm going to put his channel in the description of this video. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.